Welcome to the 525 Records podcast.
Nahilex, Nahilo, I always say, yeah, I tell everyone that you're the master of the trade. Now you know where we go, please come and fill me in. I bet the answer's pretty simple. Where you are there stars as bright as mine, or are you somewhat disappointed by their lack of shine? I thought for a while, but now I've given up. I'll come and join you, John, real soon, man, with a bowl of popcorn and a color TV. I sit here waiting for World War III. I don't know what they ever did to me, but I know we'll lick them in World War III. I feel like Chief Clomley. It's a hot August day, and all my problems are criminals who got away. I'm beaten, I give up. Yeah, you can have my badge. I'll just sit back like John and mock you all with a bowl of popcorn and a color TV. I sit here waiting for World War III. I don't know what they ever did to me, but I know we'll lick them in World War III. I hear you yelling, but what you're selling is all rhetoric to me.
My guest today on the 525 Records podcast is the founder and owner of Sly Records, Eric Bush. One of the very first things that he put out on Sly Records in the late 90s out of Salem, Oregon is the song that you're listening to now. I've had it stuck in my head for over a month now because it's so damn good. And it was written by Matt Fargo of Pretty to Look At. It's off their debut release entitled Folks I Know, and you can get it for free on the Sly Records Bandcamp. We talk about it right away because I was just enamored by all that music. These are incredible songs, and the lyrics are amazing, the melodies are amazing. And I just couldn't believe, like, who is this guy? Who is this kid who wrote all these songs and then he gets put them out on cassette tape? I mean, it's episode 5 of the 525 Records podcast. Enjoy.
World War III. I don't know what they ever did to me, but I know we'll lick them in World War
Eric Bush, welcome to the 525 Records podcast.
Hello.
When did you first realize Matt Fargo was a genius?
That's a long story, you know. Matt's an interesting guy. He and I were really good friends in middle school, and he, at the time, a lot of people will forget this about him, but he was a highly competitive tennis player and also very good at chess. And we were really good friends. And then we were kind of we drifted around in high school, and through long story short, we basically kind of linked back up in our senior year, and he would play some songs for me, and they were out of this world. And he was also a guy in high school that he and I shared a lot of the same likes, and there was not a lot of people that were into a lot of the same bands and things, and we just got along. But yeah, and that being said, as the guy that I was in a band with that I was also sharing songs with, it was an extremely humbling experience. He's one of the first people I ever saw that could pick up an instrument and just do whatever he wanted with it. And especially we were only 17, 18 at the time.
That song you just heard there is John Gardner. It's off the very first Pretty to Look At album, a tape released on Sly Records. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to start Sly Records.
I think for all of this, it's really important to remember the times, right? So we're talking, this is back in 1996, and the whole idea was just to try. There were some labels that I had purchased music from that really inspired me. I remember I bought this cassette compilation up in Portland, and it was packaged in a sandwich bag, and it was a real eye-opening thing. And that must have been like 94, 95. And it was just that idea of just, you could do it. And that's what I liked, especially about growing up in the mid 90s, was that was, today you have that with Bandcamp, but back then that was kind of a new idea that you could just like take a boombox, basically record something and put it out. So it was that label called Rectus Records and another one called Union Pole, where I bought a couple things from Union Pole, and they had a catalog that had like 30 cassettes in it. And I was like, that's wild. And that was kind of the idea. We were like, there's nothing like this in Salem. And even if nothing happened with it, it was still fun to kind of almost kind of like play acting. Like when you remember, like in high school, when you would like make up a band name and make like a t-shirt before you even had the band, we're like, let's just start a label and put something out. And, you know, we never sold a lot, but the stuff got around. And the idea at the time was I was and still am heavily into Sylvester Stallone. And Matt was a really big Sly and the Family Stone fan. And so Sly Records seemed natural. And the idea was, just to put out tapes, and we mostly gave them out to friends and stuff. But a big thing for me was just building a catalog. For some reason that excited me. So if somebody had a tape or somebody recorded something, I would go to Kinko's, make the cover artwork, and like, let's just put it out and give it a label number. I thought that was the most fun part of it.
So being inspired by other labels putting out cassette tapes, was the Folks I Know by Pretty to Look At, was that the very first Sly Records cassette release?
So almost. So the funny, Matt and I both agreed. I think I was probably more of a driving force in this part, but we would always talk about how the labels that we were really into, probably like Kill Rock Stars and some other ones like that, a lot of times their first or sometimes only release, would be like a compilation of what was happening in their town. And so to try to like look real or like look legit, that's what we wanted to do. The hard part was that there really wasn't a whole lot of cool stuff going on in Salem, Oregon at the time. But through that and through my friends and Matt's friends and friends of friends, we got enough songs together from people that our first tape was like a 16-song compilation. And I think Matt and I are probably on about half of it just to fill it out. But they were like legit distinct bands. But that was like our first release. And I want to say Folks I Know is right close after that. And that tape's funny because Matt and I had been we were a Pond cover band. And if anyone out there has never listened to Pond, boy, for us in Salem, at least in the Northwest, like me and my friends, that band is gigantic. And Matt and I were big fans of theirs. And so when he was in another band, he and I would get together and just play these like Pond cover songs for the most part. And then over like the summer, he just randomly came to me and was like, hey, I recorded all these songs with our friend Dusty. And that's what Folks I Know is. And Matt's kind of a guy like that. Like, we were in a band and then he just recorded this thing on his own. It was like, hey, I have this, we should play these. So that's not even me on the drums there. That's Matt playing his poor drumming, as he would admit. But he and our friend Dusty recorded that, I think, over a couple weeks, just in a bedroom somewhere. And then that was the beginning of us starting to not play cover songs, but playing all Matt songs, which are great. I'm the biggest Matt Fargo fan that there is.
And then at some point he moves to Japan.
Yeah. So all throughout high school, Matt had studied Japanese, And when we went to our first year of college, he went to a university in Salem that has a whole Japanese exchange program with another college. And so he lived in the Japanese dorms. He was totally fluent. And then the whole plan was he was going to go over there for like a semester or whatnot. And when he left, he kind of really never came back. His plans always kept on getting longer. So when he left, then he came back, and then he was like, I'm going right back. And he would be gone for sometimes years at a time. And so the stuff that we recorded, like that last Pretty to Look At EP, I believe, was recorded on one of his breaks when he would come back to the States. And so for me, I always wanted to continue the band, but man, he fully leaned in to being Japanese, and he lived over there for a long time. And he's back in the States now, but yeah.
At some point, he winds up doing demos and getting kind of a tentative deal with Virgin Japan.
So, dude, so Matt Fargo is kind of he's a almost legendary character. Which is funny because when you know him, he's the most humble human being. He's the kindest, most humble human being on the planet. But he always finds himself in these new experiences. And one of them was, when he went to Japan, and you'd have to ask him how it actually went down, but basically he somehow landed himself a deal on the Japanese wing of Virgin. And this was in 99, 2000. So like record labels were still a big deal. And it was all based upon, he had somehow got this song to them. It's one of our songs called My Painted Masterpiece, which is actually an amazing song, right? So he recorded like a Japanese version of this, and they were like, we love it. Give us more songs like this and we'll get you going. And in true Matt fashion, he refused to do what they wanted. So he recorded a bunch of our more like up-tempo rock songs just with Japanese. And you can find those on that Let's Relive the Glory Days. I don't think that's all the ones that he did, but those are the ones that I have. Where he was just kind of like, no, I'm not going to record all these love songs that you want, and kind of blew that. And then ended up doing music for PlayStation 2 games over there.
That whole Let's Relive the Glory Days is amazing. It's a mixture of some of the stuff you guys did, and then also it seems like he recorded on his own over in Japan. And then there's these, like, we listened to that song John Gardner. There's a Japanese version where he's singing the entire song in Japanese. That My Painted Masterpiece, which is one of my favorite songs, it's off the first EP, and it's also now there's a Japanese version of the same exact song.
And for him, it's interchangeable. And honestly, those years when he was coming back to the States, there was definitely a time where he almost was struggling with English in a way, because he just lived in Japan for so long. So when he would come back, his English was almost a little bit broken, which was kind of fun.
That Japanese John Gardner is great because it's actually 2 guitar tracks, and it's really interesting because he does this little harmony lick. I'm going to play it right now. Those little harmonies are so amazing. And if you told me that was a white kid from Salem, I mean, if you didn't know any of this backstory and you played that and you said, all right, you got $100, you got to bet, is this a white kid from Salem or is this a Japanese guy? I mean, it is flawless Japanese.
Yeah. Well, and he, and to that end, he ended up publishing books in Japanese. So for a while, he was making some sort of living where he would he published like a book of, I think, American slang, but in Japanese. But he also really liked translating books. So for a while, he would translate. I can't remember which way he would do it, if it was from Japanese to English or from English to Japanese. But his mastery of the language and the culture is insane. The funny thing that I always want to say too, and I want to get this in, is being in a band. So I was the drummer for Pretty to Look At, and I would sing backup. When right before a show, he would panic and basically X almost all of our own songs, because he would say the audience will be bored. That was always his big thing. The audience is going to be bored. So like, I think John Gardner, we may have played that once live because it's a beautiful song, right? But if you hear Matt tell it, it's boring. And so we would end up playing generally covers, because Matt was really obsessed with like, it's a boring song. The audience is going to get bored. It's the same part 3 times. And even though he would, even though he would write these beautiful songs, he was always erring on like, oh, let's just cover like 3 feelings songs or something like that. So it was that was a frustrating part. That was the frustrating end of that band, is you had this guy that was writing amazing songs and people would come to see us play them. And then we'd play, an unwound cover on an acoustic guitar and drums with brushes. So I always like to throw that in with him.
It's like he's got all these hallmarks of really great artists, like it's a side thing. He paints a masterpiece and then, oh, I'm bored. And I've moved on from that.
Absolutely. My Painted Masterpiece is a great example of that. He hated playing that live. He thought it was the most boring song. He wrote it, if I recall, because a girlfriend he had requested that he write her a love song. And he wrote that in about 15 minutes, if I recall. Just kind of picked up a guitar and wrote that. And to him, that was kind of lesser. But yeah, I happen to have always found myself with these musicians, especially that are, to your point, like great artists that are really wonderful artists without knowing it, right? Or without, Matt, like I said, is the most humble person and would tell you that he's not this great artist, that he's just a hack guitar player, which is crazy. And believe me, as a guy who was teaching himself guitar at the time, that's a really frustrating experience to go through. I'd be like, hey, here's my song with like 4 bar chords this time. And he'd be like, cool, here's a song where I never stop moving my fingers. And I was like, and he was my biggest supporter though. He would always tell me that my songs were great and even let me put one of them on one of our albums. So he's that guy.
There is an amazing amount of really interesting guitar work. He's doing harmonics, those harmonies on John Gardner, for instance.
But I'll tell you with Matt, especially, and once again, he'd be shy for me to tell you this, but it was really Elliott Smith. When Either Or came out, Matt got that record and just listened to it obsessively in his dorm. And that's kind of what changed. That was kind of his goal. And one thing that we both really loved were bands. I guess Elliott Smith's not a band, but Elliott Smith, Archers of Loaf is another good example, Unwound, of people that use really creative guitar work or like rhythms or whatnot, but aren't doing it to show off, right? So like we had, not like in the metal way, right? It's not like Yngwie Malmsteen, who's just like, look at what I can do. You had some of these musicians that were like hiding beautiful work into really good songs. But you have Elliott Smith, who was writing like Angelus, for example, which is one of Matt's favorites, was incredible. And somebody like my wife loves that song without that, right? She couldn't tell you if it was a complex song. And that was the stuff that he was kind of after, especially on the second one. You can hear him like tuning his guitar down so he can hit all the high notes and everything. That was a big thing for him.
When I was making my notes, I was like, God, who does he remind me of that's like big and famous, influences that, and this is, I wrote down Nick Drake. It was like if Nick Drake, Elliott Smith, and John Lennon had a baby. And then they gave him a 4-track and no money whatsoever. And I always thought, God, if this kid at the time had a record deal, a budget, a producer, like, I mean, the sky could have been the limit, I think.
Right. Well, we say that, but then he actually had that opportunity, right? So I think that really, I mean, I don't think Matt ever wanted that, and I don't think either of us wanted it, to be honest. I wanted to keep the band going just because I really liked it. It was one of, when you're a drummer, for all you drummers out there, it's a unique position because you have to really be a fan of the music, because you don't really get a lot of creative input aside from, the rhythm, but also I like arranging, but it depends on who you're in a band with, right? But you have to be a real big fan. And so I was always a big fan of his first, but neither of us had a drive. You know what I mean? Like, I know it seems like we did all this stuff with like setting up this label and had all this drive, but really, I mean, we were both some of the laziest musicians out there. I would have little pockets of energy and that was about it. But yeah, I do wish that we could have made more music, because I feel like the stuff that we did right at the end was really interesting, but it just wasn't to be. He had other stuff to do.
I love, the lo-fi recordings when they're so filled with like compositional talent and passion. When you can make the recording quality not even a factor, where you
Yeah.
can hear tape hiss for days and wobbling, and there's just shitty gear and horrible equipment, but it doesn't matter because the song is so good. That's always like, what piques my interest in a
And
big way.
Yeah, and we were really into all of that. So like in the 90s, I know, especially for me, well, and for Matt too, like Kill Rock Stars and K Records were big things for us. One, because they were close, right? They were up in Washington. And also because of that, it was like you didn't have to sound perfect. I've never been a technical genius. I am not musically trained. I'm not recording trained. All of it's just kind of picked up. And I'm a big fan of that, right? It's making everything as accessible as it can be. I think music and recording for years was kind of held as this like only experts could do it. And I hated that, and I loved especially like what K Records did was like, no, you can just hook up a boombox and put out a cassette. And to your point, if it's a good song, it comes through. Right now, on top of that, I like to make good recordings as well. So I'm not, I don't want to say like I'm just pro that, but it was nice in high school to be able to say, yeah, let's just make a tape. Screw it. And pretty to look at, we never had a humongous fan base, but we definitely, among other musicians, we definitely would have a lot of people that would come to those shows. Matt always had his fans for sure. Our second album, the one that I was actually finally going to play on, that we had a lot of songs worked up. Our friend Eric Alley, who is also a wonderful musician and has played a lot in the Northwest. He was in King Black Acid and some other bands, but he was a really good friend of Matt and I's in Salem, and he bought a digital 8-track. Basically, you record on the digital 8-track into a zip disk. And in 1999, this was like mind-blowing to us that he had this thing. And we recorded that whole second album by basically giving Eric Alley booze. So the price of the day session would be a bottle, usually of slow gin, which is what he was really into. So we'd bring over a bottle of that. I don't know how Matt bought them because we were 19, but we would bring that over, and that was our kind of pay for the day. And we would just spend like 8 hours at Eric Alley's house. And a lot of that was figuring this thing out, was figuring out this digital 8-track.
Well, I happen to have a little bit of experience recording on, I think, the same exact digital 8-track. It's a Roland VS840. It was the one that I had. Also, 100 megabyte zip disks, which would fill up insanely quick.
Yes.
It was the first time you had like these inboard digital effects, which, were cool at the time, but now they're, pretty 8-bit or whatever you would call them. But what you wound up with is all these zip disks. It was almost as limiting as a tape machine where you'd run out of tape eventually. Those zip disks were not cheap. You had to buy them, and, it was about as close to recording on tape as you could get.
For those that don't know, like the late 90s into the early 2000s, just technology was moving at such a weird clip. And so it went from all of a sudden like cassette was the thing to just one day it was like you had to have a CD, and people weren't really messing with cassettes. So really by the time that I had my game together enough to start putting out like tapes with like color covers and stuff, people had already moved on, right? So people were expecting CDs, and you couldn't really do it yet. I mean, I remember with that second Pre to Look At album, to get it from the 8-track, and just recording on that thing was a beast anyways. But then to actually get it onto a CD, I mean, Matt happened to know somebody in the like audio department at his college. And the three of us went in with the 8-track and all of those zip disks like late at night, and basically had to like sneak in there. And it took us about, I think, 4 hours to get that onto one disc. And then I had this like CD master, and it was like this piece of gold because that was our master. And then we dubbed cassettes off of that. And I had friends that helped me do it that would just sit there, and you had to play the thing live, right? You just sit there for the full hour to make one tape.
That was the worst part about it, is that at the end of all that, you still had to like kind of go into a studio. Whereas at least with a 4-track, you probably had a tape deck and you could just RCA cable into it. With those early Rolands. And then, a couple of years after that, Korg, which I happen to have one, it's a Korg D1200. Korg came out, and then they started putting CD burners in the actual digital 8s with big internal hard drives. But before that, on those old Rolands, at the end of the day, you still had to go to a studio.
Yeah. Not fun. And those discs were expensive. Yeah. And I have like 50 of them laying around, just because I figured out by the end, I could maybe maximize 4 songs per disc. And that was playing fast and loose.
I happened to interview your brother for the last episode. For anybody that doesn't know, the legendary Portland CAC is fronted by Eric and Mr. Walkenfuss. They're both brothers. Nobody else was doing what you guys were doing. That first CAC record was so huge. The Chopsticks shows. We talked about a lot of this on the podcast last week, but what are some of your favorite memories?
I think, that was the one, I was thinking about this. That was the one album that I was telling you earlier about how I have little pockets of energy, and that was certainly one. For some reason, that year just happened to work out. I bought the 8-track. I used it for a while before we started recording that. And with CAC, it did not start out as the end goal being an album and doing all that. It was really just messing around. And you'll, as a guy who knows about gear, I think you'll find this interesting. So I moved to Portland. I did not know how to play a keyboard very well. Matt would leave his at my house, and that's kind of what I would mess around with. But then when I moved to Portland, obviously I didn't take that keyboard. So I went to Fred Meyer and I bought a keyboard that was, I forget the name of it, but it was this blue basic keyboard that was designed to be like a DJ keyboard. So it was like, I think it was called the DJX. That was the keyboard that I used to basically make all of the CAC beats. I used the drum samples from that, and pretty much all the keyboard sounds were all from that. And so that first year was just me messing with that keyboard and making beats. And then, we would spend the day rapping over it. It was only once we had like 4 or 5 songs that we were like, hey, we could probably make this work. We could probably do an album. And I, for some reason, just took a lot of control over it, as far as I would never give Brad mixes of songs. My big worry was that if we made a couple songs and burned them out onto a CD, then we'd just kind of lose interest and be like, well, we have these 3 songs, we'd play them for friends, and that would be it, right? So no one ever heard it until it came out. And so probably my biggest favorite memory from that was probably that first show, because people didn't hate it, right? Like, we had pressed these CDs, made this whole thing, and then it actually worked. If you watch the video of that first show, we're both really nervous because pretty much every single person that we know is there. And that was part of it, because I wouldn't let anybody hear it. So people knew that Brad and I were going to get up there and rap. That was pretty much what they knew. And in 2000, that was kind of, I don't want to say that was like the craziest thing, but that was not, to your point, that wasn't like a normal thing.
Dare I say it was daring, bold, extremely risky. I mean, you guys, you had to bring it, because if you were whack at all, it was going to be a train wreck up there. And, must have been a lot of pressure. And one of the first shows I saw you guys at was at BAM's Halloween party, which is recently uploaded by Walkenfuss, which is great because it's like a time machine. You get to go back and look at it, but you can clearly see there's some times where you guys had more words per song than probably anybody else in the game, and just sometimes Brad would have to feed you that first line. And then once you had it, you would be like a racehorse leaving the gate. You would not miss another word in the entire song. I always thought that was really impressive.
If you listen, there's kind of a nod to that, and that's absolutely true. There was at least once every show and after a while, I got to just be the look. I'd give Brad the look, and he would just say like the first word, and then I just go. There's an inside joke about that on the heel turn. I forget which song it is, but I say the first line is the hardest. When I got it, I'm good. Because they still are that way, right? If you prompt, and I'm not going to do it, but if you prompted me with like the first word or two from any CAC song, my brain can just regurgitate it. But I'm telling you, live on stage, half the time it won't come.
It's one of those things where if you weren't like near the stage or on the stage or particularly looking, you'd never even know, But if you were close at all, you could see it happen. It was amazing.
We got better about hiding it for sure. I noticed that too on the BAM show, and that was literally our second show. So our second show, we're dressed up for Halloween and playing in our friend's backyard, and a thing that I wish was said on the video, as I remember this, we couldn't really move. So the setup was on this rickety stage that BAM and somebody had constructed. Our CD, which was our backing track, was on that stage. But if you moved at all, the CD would skip. And you even hear it happen, I think, once or twice during the show. So talk about doubly awkward, because we were really nervous. And really, as a rapper, and we kind of figured this out later, there's nothing else going on, right? There's no guitar to watch. There's nothing. And so you are the entertainment. And you find out real quick, a lot of people aren't that entertained by the rapping itself. Some people are, but so to sit there and have to put on a show and not be able to move, I remember that was kind of like a nightmare scenario.
Such a big part of your guys' whole stage persona was you guys jumping around, doing crazy jumps, and really visually active and moving around quite a bit. So it is extremely weird to see you guys dead still, trying not to make the CD player skip.
Yeah, and if you watched, that first show at Chopsticks, I've always been a drummer. I'm a drummer first, and I've played lots of shows as a drummer. And one of the best parts about being a drummer, as long as you don't mess up, nobody really notices you, right? Except other drummers. You always know the one guy that's in the house that's the drummer because he's staring at you, and I'm usually that guy. So like when I watch live shows still, I'm mainly focused on the drummer. That's the most fun part for me. But aside from that, you're kind of in the background. And so doing CAC was a really weird experience because aside from singing karaoke a handful of times, I'd never been just standing out there with the microphone. And I feel like we both got better at it. Brad had always been a front man in whatever music he had done. So for him, it was a little bit more natural. But for me, it was a new experience. And I wish we had more of our later shows on video because I feel like they were definitely more exciting, right? That first one is us just getting through it. And it actually works, which is crazy to me.
Somebody needs some credit here. Mark's ex-wife, Megan, she was the king of throwing parties. She really got into it. Her and Monica carved all these pumpkins. They got hay. Somehow they got hay and they figured out, I don't know, her uncle or somebody figured all those like scaffolding poles and, getting the lights set up. I mean, it was a big, intense labor project to get that show ready. And that was one epic party. I'm glad I got to be there.
I will give Megan serious props on that. Not only for that, also she, from what I remember, I think she's the only person that has a real CAC inspired tattoo. But yeah, I went to a couple Halloween parties at BAM's, and those were the only parties I've legit been to that were like the parties in the movies, right? Where you show up and there's like 100 people and there's props. It was like being in like a John Cusack movie. It was crazy.
And one of the crazier things too is on a lot of those CC recordings, you guys have brought in a lot of other MCs to do cameos. It was a real ensemble. In addition to recording and documenting, half and half behind the camera on all those shows, he's on a couple of songs. Nate, Bam. There's one song off the Heel Turn I think really encapsulates the whole ensemble. So I don't know how you feel about this song, but I'm going to play Pardon Me Patooey.
Breathing fire tonight. Like Ronnie Law, I got my finger caught and I couldn't touch the mic till they cut it off. For this one, we assembled the whole damn team. Have you tossing in the towel like Mean Joe Green? Lyrics so bold that they're seen from miles. Call my verbal style, we're projectile. Can we be this good? It does not make sense, but we're proving when it's like the two-pocket defense. I'm a party on the move like discos do. You colonel mustard cause you don't have a clue. I am your rapping telegram. I terrorize your land like the son of Sam. I'm the master of the game like Captain Numakwa. And I'm blowing up like Kurt Backward. We started locally and killed it vocally. And now we're on top like it's supposed to be. Oatmeal and I flow for real like Monty Hall. When I make a deal, I don't grab the steel, I don't grab the Glock. I take 4 balls and I take a walk. Oh, Kendo, we're not your friend though. A baseball star like Nintendo. Stand up, double, know that you're in trouble. A sick boy, but not the kind in a bubble. I say it's the moves, and you hope that I'm wrong, but you can build me up just like a goop song. I'm not a mall rat, but I'm all that. Call me daylight savings when I fall back. I'm not tall and fat, cause I'm tall and lean. I got a deep history like Holocene. You're also mean when I'm also nice. I'm not a killer, but a thriller like Vincent Price.
Breathing fire tonight.
Hotter than 100,000 NASCAR tailpipes, a handful of jalapenos out in the trail type, a bird on a wire in an empty nest. I can find you in the snow with a barrel on my chest. I just got dumped and I thought it would move, but I'm one Nathan under a groove. It's the ultimate fight. I'm getting it on like some weird hybrid of Cujo and Khan. Don't seek out spot, launches out of control. Cuter than a triple singing Nat King Cole. I was a chopster before a Napster, and I know why it's called a Telecaster. Has the shoulders above, Master Blaster. I'm in love like Jimmy with Cynthia Blaster, and I like carbs in a shotgun way. Go with walker bus, don't roll away.
I'm such a chatterbox that I shatter rocks. Digging into you like a baddest box. Lace the spikes, face the mic. Rigging you up like I was calling a strike. Lenny Dykstra, but not a southpaw. Mouthful of words, not a mouthful of jaw. Know how you saw what I say so deaf? Not getting the axe like Pink Lady and Jeff. Like Chuck Barris when I'm running the gong. The guy who sang the song when he sung along. Like the Happy Mondays when I write for luck. And I'm over the top when I drive a truck. Going through you like gas through a funnel. Words pouring out and they flow like a runnel. Like a rivulet when I spit my bit quit. Watch me stand and play while you sit and quit. Kids don't dance, cause we don't give them a chance. And my hitman dreams ride for romance. It's all happenstance, I'm drunk on the moon. Double nickels on the dime just like D-Boone. Just like dude, my name is a killing word. Round the CAC, it's okay to be a nerd. Occurred to me today, we've come a long way. Triple date, flying V like Gordon Bombay. Took a stay for the summer at the Wannabe Manor. Live in the pirate side with Danny and Joey Tanner. Cut it out. Rap over beats like a circle jerks, cause we're wild in the streets. Fantastic like the first sound by Wham. I can't go to sleep like the Wu-Tang Clan. Number one super guy like Hong Kong Phooey. Donna Tanuki, pardon me, Patooey.
Breathing fire tonight.
Floss daily, and I don't mean bling. I mean the flossing that I do directly over my sink. I mean the rock that I had for my dinner last week. I mean the stutter stuck in my teeth because my Baba Gay was back in the day. I'm a smooth operator, but I'm no Sade. Got a little deeper voice and not quite as cute. But if there's nobody on my bed, well I can knock my own boots. I mean I'm tiptoe in slow mo for modo, coming to clean, fill up my jeans, run on the back door before you even got time to realize it. You get fat from my rap, now you want to supersize it. Have it your way, have it my way. I'm about to make you cookie like the WA. Like Kevin Mitchell did way back in the day. I'm a hand this rapping and throw decay. Guess who's at it again? Me and no spin verbally set trends with skills flow through an ink pen. Coolest cucumbers from a collective. We're calling all composers to be cool and connected. Let's make it known that this art is respected by those who choose to be unique and also eclectic. Now as a man with different methods, check how I bring the pain and say no house to clown, no records. Quick to reject this, aren't you? Then you want to know it will take more than honest for me to be a goner. Man, this industry is so clogged up, it will take like performance just a courtesy flush. If he gets down the toilet for we have been spoiled with instead of enjoyment. Music full of disappointment, no longer pushing the rear for we appear as the latest bad boys dropping this flavor in your ear. Rah!
The Eastport Warehouse. The last MC you heard on that track is a guy named KB who worked at the Eastport Warehouse with you and Mark.
Yes.
I called Mark yesterday. Mark is Bam, for anybody that doesn't know. He's also on that track right before KB. Well, first, I would just like to say, from a recording standpoint, that song is amazing on so many levels because not only does every MC have his main verse, but there's also sometimes two or maybe one or two backup kind of hype man tracks, backup verses to mix all of those and make them consistent. Everybody's got a different voice, you got to use the same mic and it still sounds different. And it is a mixing challenge and it is so smooth and there's so much continuity there. It's amazing. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and you would never know that song took probably 6 months, right, to get together. Yeah, it's funny. That's actually a beef of mine when I listen to rap now because nobody gets together in the studio anymore for their posse songs or for even guest spots. And yeah, it's a big sore spot with me when you can tell, right? When it's like clearly somebody recorded this with a totally different mic and a setup. It's just lazy. So Eastport Warehouse is kind of where everything really got going. So C-Dog, who's the first rapper on there, he and I have been best friends since grade school, still are. So C-Dog lived with us for a time in high school, and he and I just had this idea of like the CAC, we should be this rap group, and that was just kind of it. When I moved to Portland, I was working at the Salem warehouse, and I just happened to transfer to Eastport Warehouse. And I don't know if I can describe just the gutter area that the Eastport Warehouse was in the year 1999, 2000.
82nd and Holgate. We lived on 75th and Holgate.
So
right down the street.
Yeah. So I think it's changed now, that neighborhood, but Eastport Warehouse, when we would look out we were in a Walmart parking lot. And when we would look out the window across the street, we called it was like the trifecta or something. It was like, but there was a strip club, an alcohol shop, and a porn shop all in the same building. And that's what was right across the street from us. And there was a bus stop out front. So just working there was an adventure. I mean, we had so much shoplifting. I could tell you 3 hours of stories just from working there, but I won't. But that's where I met Bam. Bam is Mark, but I'd call him Bam. That name, by the way, simply came from the fact that at Warehouse, you had to put your initials when you logged in, and somebody else had already been MAB. So Mark had to switch his around. And so whenever you would be talking to Mark on his computer, it would say Bam. So we all just called him Bam. And then I insisted that be his rap name. So I met Bam. We had a lot of the same taste. Bam has wonderful taste in rap music, right? So he and I got along on that level. And then KB also worked with us there. And KB was a legit rapper. So he had, if you look him up, he is on a compilation called Triple Beam Circus, and I think it's the third one. Like, we sold it at Warehouse. So what's crazy to us is we were working with this dude and we would sell a compilation album that he was on, and like Tupac's on it. And so that to us was wild. So to me, getting KB was kind of important just because he was interested in being a rapper, and I was like, well, dude, I'm doing this rap project. You should come and, be on it. One of the inside jokes, by the way, on the CAC album, and you would know this, is on Cancel One Career, which is the song that has Bam and KB on it. One of my lines, I kind of do it in like a really obnoxious, like DMX way. I do the from city to city. And that is a direct joke with KB, because his song on this Triple Beam Circus thing, they had asked him to record one take, like kind of like a DMX style recording, and that's what they used. So he was really embarrassed about it because it wasn't like his style. So it's him rapping over this like R&B song. His rap is great, but he's doing this thing, and we were all clowning him. So I put it in there. And once again, that was recorded before we ever planned on releasing it. And so then I'm like, man, for 20 years, people think I'm trying to do DMX. And I'm really not. It was just kind of making fun of KB. And that's what I liked about CAC. A lot of that is just us trying to impress each other or make each other laugh. You know what I mean? There's a lot of hidden lines in there. I know at one point, Bam has a line on one of his songs about the rap professor. Save the rap professor lecture for another day. That is him directly taking a dig at me because I was a really obnoxious rap producer. Like if dudes came in with rhymes and I didn't like them, I'd be like, no, or you should say it this way, or like that's kind of corny, or like we don't want to swear that much or whatever. And so I loved hiding that kind of stuff in there. So that's how I got those guys. And then
it's Easter egg city,
Yes.
And you had to have a level of sophistication and intellectualism to be able to even hang in the CAC crew, and you got to think about the era too. This is like the height of Cash Money rap.
Yeah.
So to have and a lot of intellectual rap kind of gets into the political, game for whatever reason. There's this, synchronicity there, but you guys this is what made you guys so special and unique, and all those little Easter eggs and all those little songs. It's like a never-ending treasure trove. There's more words per second than somebody should count them up. I'm pretty sure it would the average would be 3 to 5 words for every single second of a lot of those songs. And one of my favorite KB lines is off that Cancel One Career song that me and Mark always talked about, was the toothpaste linkage, right?
That's crazy.
KB has a line that goes, "You aim for a close-up, but hold up, I don't use Colgate." I mean, and that is a tongue twister in itself, but to do it and ride the beats so well, that was one of my favorite KB lines. So, but you, KB, Bam, Onug, you guys all worked at that Eastport warehouse.
Yeah, well, Onug, yeah, that's right. Onug had gotten me the job in Salem warehouse. So Onug's another Salem guy. He's like my other big brother. So Brad Walkenfuss, he and Nate, or Onug, have been friends forever. And so Onug's another one of those guys, like we were talking about Matt. I don't know if Onug, Nate, is one of the most incredible musicians I've ever been around. Talk about a guy that can pick up any instrument and just do whatever he wants, especially guitar. He's an amazing piano player as well. He was a touring musician for M Ward for a time, and just he's such a good musician. So for us to get him rapping on an album was really fun. And he was into the same, he and Brad would listen to NWA and stuff like that. So to get him, so he was a natural. He was just kind of like, we're going to do this. I want Onug to be part of the crew, just because he was like our best friend at the time and still is. But and then Oatmeal is another one. So Oatmeal, one, had just an amazing voice. Oat has a really deep baritone, and he's been Brad's friend forever, and he's another one of my unofficial big brothers. And so we just had him. Oatmeal's a trip because you could always get him over, but getting him to write was really difficult. And so Brad would just write his raps for him, and then we basically prop him up. He would deliver it like in 1 or 2 takes, and then go back onto the couch, which I loved. I kind of loved that we had like a couple old dirties in the crew.
Yeah, well, Master Nate, that was he was pretty legendary on that tip. But I asked Bam to describe what KB was like, and he said, him and Eric are cut from the same cloth. They're just good dudes. Super, you can just trust them. They're just the best dudes ever. So I thought that was pretty awesome. And then I asked Bam to tell me about who went to who, to be in CAC. Did Brad or did Eric come to you, or did you go to him? And he said that he went to you and was really patient. You were really patient and gave him a chance. And he remembers being in the basement doing a lot of those tracks, even when KB was there. So I just thought that was a pretty cool side note.
Yeah, and that was, back then, because we went back to like favorite times. What I loved about especially the first one is life was just different than it was a couple years later. For some reason in 2000 we all just had time, and so when I would record with Bam, like we would sit down and do everything together. So like the song that Bam and I have together, which that one was really early too. That was before, because otherwise Brad would have been on it. But we were just kind of like, let's record a song. And all of that whole beat I made in probably 20 minutes. So Bam would come over, and as we were writing, I would just be like, I'll make up a beat. That whole beat is based upon the fact that I accidentally figured out a chorus from a Faith No More song on the guitar. It's the only reason it's even on there. So I put that on there. Bam and I rapped over it, but we did it all together. And same thing. Like, so if we recorded a song with KB, like we would all just be there for 8 hours in my basement, which I loved. Brad and I recorded every song together on that, as far as we'd sit down, write it out. I'd usually make the beats while Brad was there. I very rarely made them alone. So it would just kind of be like, this is what we're doing today. He'd show up at like 9 a.m. and we would just do that all day. And then at the end of the day, we'd have a song. And I liked that, and so that's why a lot of the raps too have a lot of hidden jokes for each other. And so and to the Easter egg thing, that was something that we loved about that era of rap. Like I can go back and listen to, I'm going to give a big shout out to 1993. That is one of the CAC's favorite albums. And what's funny is I'm not even a huge Naughty by Nature fan, but Naughty by Nature's album, 1993, dude, it is beginning to end just a masterpiece. Tretch is out of his head. And it's one of those albums, Brad and I talk about it, there's still stuff that you hear for the first time after hearing it 1,000 times, simply because, like what you said, he's going so fast and he packs everything with so many hidden lines, but also hidden rhymes. And that was something we always loved, was like trying to fit in as many rhymes, but make them kind of not obvious, right? So only if you go back, or even if you see it on paper, you're like, that rhyme's there. And that was the stuff that we used to get a kick out of. But really, a lot of CAC was just like, let's just rap fast, because that's what we like, and no wasted lines. That was kind of a big thing. And no wasted words. So if you notice, like on the first album, there's maybe a couple swear words here and there, but the rule was you can't use them as a filler, right? Just to get the syllables in. And that was always a big thing, is, no wasted syllables, no filler words. Every line should be good. You have to end with a good line. Like, the whole thing was not being lazy, right? And trying to pack in as many rhymes, just making it creative like that. And that made it fun. That was also kind of the challenge, is that those songs would take us sometimes 7-8 hours to write, 16 bars, just because it's hard to write raps. If you've never tried to write a rap, it's difficult, but also trying to impress the person sitting across from you. And Brad and I are we're in sync with what we like and what we know. And so you couldn't show up with less, you know what I mean?
Yeah, one thing CAC was boring. I mean, it's like Neo in the Matrix, the bullets come at you real fast. You're like, oh my God, this is so many words, so many bullets. But then the time slows down, and then you can kind of grab them and see them going over your head in slow motion. And that's when it really sinks in. Like, dude, this is something really special. Like, this is, a lot of rap music. It's so just self-congratulatory, and you guys had a whole different angle, a whole different spin. You were able to do that in a much different way, and there's no going to the gutter, and no freestyle tricks, no swearing. I mean, the degree of difficulty was a 10 easily.
And that was really the fun part, right? It was kind of setting those boundaries and those rules, and then holding each other and the guests to that. And that was kind of the more difficult thing, is Brad and I were in sync, but then when other people would come in, you'd have to be like, nah, we're not really doing that,
You were way ahead of the curve. I mean, looking back on it now, nobody was doing that back then. So it always amazes me that you guys aren't held up in a light like that, where you're kind of recognized, because sure, there was other bands doing their own websites, but they're doing the same kind of music as everybody else. Maybe they're in a punk band, maybe they're playing rock and roll, indie, whatever, metal band, but nobody can tell me there's another equally comparable CAC kind of project. Sure, there's nerdcore, you can listen to MC Chris, whatever, but you guys had this unique angle in a self-contained DIY whole top down logistical chain. It's impressive, and it's one of the main motivations for, trying to do what I do. But
Yeah. Well, and to that point, thank you. And to that point, it's funny because I'm not down with nerdcore at all, which is funny because I've heard even back then people would be like, oh, like you'll love this guy, and they'd give me something like nerdcore related, and it does nothing for me, because that was never. It's hard to explain, but that was never our goal. It just kind of happened that way, right? I wouldn't say like, hey, guest artists like KB. I wouldn't say, hey, you have to write something like with like stuff in it. It was just like write a sweet rap. And same with Bam. I never said, I might critique like, hey, like let's not talk about that or something, but I would never be like, hey, you have to squeeze in a bunch of pop culture. That has happened to be what Brad and I were into.
It's a luxury problem, no doubt about it, but nobody could put a label on you guys. Nobody could stuff you into a genre box, which is always a great sign. So nerdcore just happened to be that. You guys are so much bigger than that, though. You transcended that by a million miles, but nobody could figure out what the hell is this, because it's so new, so unique.
Which was fun and also kind of the frustrating part, right? So for me, if you look especially at the early merch, so early on I was really involved, and then as it went, I kind of ceded a lot of it to Brad, which is pretty much our relationship anyways. That's the classic big brother, little brother, right? But early on, my idea was let's market us basically as a punk band. So if you look at like our early stickers, they're just black. They're black with our logo on them. All of our buttons were like punk buttons, and I loved that. That was my idea of punk at the time, was very much just like, if you're doing something creative that you want to do, that's punk, right? Apparently not a lot of people agree with me on that. So we would play, we kind of could never find, other than playing with maybe like the Buttery Lords, right? Aside from them, we could never really find the right mix as far as when we would try to play with rock bands that weren't friends of ours, the crowd just wouldn't take it sometimes. And then when we played hip hop shows, sometimes that wouldn't work either. There's a lot of people, which is ironic because we were basically really inspired by rap from less than 10 years ago. And then we're playing rap shows and people are like, oh, this isn't rap. It's like, well, that sure is to me.
Yeah, I mean, the era of the DJ hadn't even happened, right? There was no Jurassic 5 yet. Cut Chemist, DJ Shadow, all these guys that would do DJ albums. It wasn't even a thing yet, It was so early.
Yeah, it was a weird experience. And so for me, it was kind of fun. I like that. I know for Brad, sometimes it was more of a frustrating experience. I kind of liked being that group. I remember once we played a rap show. I won't name them, but we played a rap show with like a legit rap crew in town.
Cool nuts.
No, although I've met him many times, that man is a wonderful, amazing, kind man. That guy
in the late 90s, you couldn't turn on K-Boo without hearing Cool Nuts. I mean, they were big. They were huge.
Yeah, and he's great. That guy's done so much for that city. But no, we played with like what would have been considered like a legit, hip hop group. And I purposely I had this really horrible like green sweater that had a guy in a old 20s car on the front. Like I purposely just like, I'm like, let's look as just stupid, not stupid, but I'm going to be as anti-rap as possible. And we brought like, I think a video of like BMXers or something. And the rap crew straight up like clowned us the whole time that we were playing. And I remember thinking like, yeah, this is what I want to be, right? Like I want to be this guy that's like, I still feel like I feel like Brad and I are great rappers. I feel like this is good music. And I hated that kind of that whole time period of like, well, unless you're doing this, then you're not rap. I hated that. I know sometimes I think that part of me would frustrate Brad sometimes because I was very happy to be that person, to be like, yeah, I'll show up and be the hip guy then, if that's what they think it's going to be, because it's going to go that way anyways. To me, I like bands like that, that are going to show up and do their own thing. But that was also the frustrating part for us.
This is what I'm saying. Daring, brave, risky, bold. And one of my favorite things is all the crazy t-shirts. You guys had the best obscure t-shirts. Like in the Chopstick show, you're wearing a Corey Feldman shirt that you could have only gotten if you actually went to that Corey Feldman show. The shirts at the BAM's Halloween party, hilarious. You guys always had the just sickest shirts.
I did, by the way, get that at the Corey Feldman 2002 tour. Yeah, I saw that in Portland. I love Corey Feldman, but yeah, I totally got that shirt. And to your point, I wore that on purpose, right? I'm like, what would be funnier than to see a guy rapping at Chopsticks wearing a Corey Feldman shirt? And I'm glad that you noticed that. That's a deep cut. Funny postscript to that is Corey played here in Tucson, God, about a year ago, and I straight up wore that shirt. And I was like, I was so proud to be like the lifer. I was like the guy at the Corey Feldman show. I'm like, I got the tour t-shirt from 20 years ago. My wife was not as impressed as I was, but yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. But so the postscript to that story is like this crew back there, they clowned us and all of that. And then when we got done playing, people forget, for a lot of our shows, we brought a pretty sizable audience. And most of them were our friends. We just happened to have a lot of friends at that time, and they were very dedicated. And I had friends that would drive up from Staten for every single show in Portland, right? Which is nuts to me. But we would always have a dedicated audience, which was really fun. And so my proud moment from that night was that they all kind of cleared out once we were done. And then I remember that crew even mocking us while they were playing, being like, oh, like they drove everybody out. And I was like, nah, we brought everybody in. I rap about that, actually. That's our song, Is Gresham in the House, is kind of about that night and kind of the frustration that we would have. Cause I can't stand, I'm not a big fan of exclusion like that, right? Like, this is the thing and you have to do it this way.
And you hit it right on the head, the exclusion, because in those crews it's just all bravado and bling or whatever the angle is, you guys had this accessibility and connectedness with your fans that those guys could never hope to have. If one guy in that situation, you have an MC that's on stage looking down on everybody, oh, worship me, whereas the CAC we're in this together.
Yes. Well, and that comes from that small show background. And like, you grew up in a place like Salem, and the thing I liked about that is, like, if you could even get a show together, you might get 3 bands and they're going to be wildly different. And I liked that. I liked playing with different style bands. It was just kind of like, let's see who's playing tonight. And yeah, big up them, that was how, like the Widgets, like we would bring them for a lot of shows just because I loved their band. Those are old friends of mine from Salem, from high school. I've known Becky Meyer since we were like in grade school and known those kids forever. And that was kind of the thing. It was like, yes, like we're rappers, they're a rock band, but screw it. And it was fun, and that whole thing of why wouldn't we put these people on and all of that. But yeah, I've never believe me, man, playing so many shows, I've never understood that whole concept of like, and attending shows of like, hey, all 3 bands need to be the same. I think that gets boring. I would love to go to a show today and see like a rap group open up for like a punk band or something. Because it's just interesting to me. We were talking about recording in 2000. I want to get this in here because I've never really made this clear. Maybe I should have bragged about this more in the actual albums and stuff. But with every CAC beat, I never owned a sampler. So if you listen to those beats, man, I am playing those things live for 3.5 minutes. And with the Digital 8, punching in and punching out is really complicated. So aside from vocals, if I was going to do like a keyboard track or something, even though it sounds like I'm looping it, I am standing there with my DJX little keyboard and I'm playing that little loop over and over again live.
Anybody that's ever sat and tried to record vocals knows, especially back then before, recording was recording, doing all those punch-ins, punch-outs, whoever you're recording, whatever MC's like, let me get that again. Oh, can you punch me in here? I mean, the hours and hours, 6 months of punching vocals will drive anybody crazy.
Yeah. And I do want to correct one thing. Brad remembered part of that wrong. So Brad, I would punch in. He was a very big on 4 bars. So I would have 2 separate main vocal tracks for him, right? So he would do 1/2 on one and 1/2 on the other. He would do 4, take a breath, do the other 4, and vice versa. Me, I always try to get my main rap down in 1 take. So that's just one little thing I want to correct from him. So his experience would be that, yes. And then we would always do kind of an emphasis line. That was just something we stole from other rappers where, yeah, you just get on there and kind of hype yourself. I wish that we would have gone back and been each other's hype. That's one mistake I feel like we made throughout. Like, I should have been the guy doing seconds on his lines, and he should have been the one on mine. But that's only hindsight. That only comes from playing those live. I mean, when you record, you record you would write the verse and record it within 2 hours. And so I wouldn't have known his rap then, but that's one regret I have. But yeah, but to that point, yes. And after trial and error, you kind of get to know everybody's mic settings, right? Like Brad has a big booming voice. So for him, I would have to kind of turn everything down to not distort, whereas mine's a little lighter. And so I would have to turn myself up a little louder. KB would record really quiet. It just kind of depended on the person. But yeah, it's just doing it. It's trial and error, until you can get everything leveled up right.
And that's the other thing that gave the live performances such a different feel is you guys were each other's hat man live. But you listen to the record and, live at the Tonic, you're filling in on his verses, he's filling in on yours. And it's a little different taste, a little different flair.
I'm glad that live at the Tonic recording is there, because that kind of captures us at our probably most primed, as far as I could tell from listening to that. We're kind of in our zone. I tell a story about not even preparing for that show, which is totally true. I mean, by that point, I think I forgot that we had a show that night. Like it had kind of gotten to that point where he would call me and be like, "Are you going to be there tonight?" And be like, "Oh yeah," and we just had it down. We played enough consistently over those first years that, yeah, it was just, and being brothers helps, right? So I kind of know what he's going to do. We don't really fight. We've never been that kind of brothers. So I think we've gotten into arguments in our whole life. So,
that live at the Tonic show is so great because not only is the recording quality vastly superior to the other live stuff, because a lot of times it was just being filmed or recorded. This was actually a board recording. The low end is there. That's the big difference between the Chopsticks videos, the Boiler Room, Bam's Party. This was a soundboard recording with audience mixed in. And then, it was at the height of your guys's, right at the end there, 2004. Yep. You guys had done the second record. You had all those new songs. So the live at the Tonic, it brings those two records together. You're playing all the new stuff, which is, fantastic. I always thought.
Yeah. And really, I got to the point, I think both of us did, where we really liked that stuff better. I feel like the stuff that we did later ended up being more what we thought we would have been, which is funny because I think most people prefer the first album. And I think that's how it goes for all musicians, right? I think your goal, you kind of end up doing your best stuff on the way, to your goal. But yeah, we spent a lot of time recording that.
As far as the second record, Diz Hicks, College Degrees, Sweet Stan Lane, I mean, these are vastly different production quality and compositional in nature versus the first record, which is really hard to do. Most bands just kind of copy themselves, and the second record might be a little different, but you guys had already shaken it up, and that's why the live at the Tonic is so killer. But yeah, talk me through. We got into the Boston guys last week, so what from a production standpoint, what changed for you on that second record?
So it's funny. So the biggest thing was, one, we put out the record and then we played pretty consistently for about a year. And at that same time, kind of to your point, I hit just a straight up writer's block. I didn't know where to go, because if you look at projects I've been involved in the past, I typically do a band for one album and then, move on or something. And so CAC was different because it's my brother, right? So you don't move on from that. And also people seem to like it, which was interesting. And so I just didn't really know where to go. So production wise, and remember, I had made all of those beats using that one lame DJX keyboard that I had, but I'd kind of used as much as I could, especially drums. Drums were a big issue for me, ironically, as a drummer. And I just didn't really know where to go. And so that first year after, I don't think he and I did not make one song, because it was not on purpose. It was certainly Brad's interest was there. I just was like, I don't know what to do. And I didn't want to give up control to anybody. So that was another part of it. And then I think Onug helped me find this little drum machine, and I started messing with that. And that kind of turned everything back on. And also life was changing a lot. There's just a lot going on. But so we started, I think the very first song that we made after the record was Kenzie Kensington, which is to me, not a great song, but people seem to always like it. Brad really liked it. I'm not happy with myself on it.
It's got one of the greatest lines, which is, "Oh baby, I want to get with you and drink paps from a pitchet."
Oh yeah, people love that, right? Brad comes through on that. Brad saves that song. I'm definitely the weak link on there, and that was kind of the other thing is I don't know if anyone else, people out there that do creative things, you sometimes just don't have it. Like sometimes like you pick up your guitar and things happen and sometimes it doesn't. And like, I just didn't have it for like a year and I can't explain to you why. I had this great energy there for a while and then it just left. And so we made Kenzie Kensington and I was like, and then I somehow, and I don't remember making it, but we made Matt Noakes, which to me is my favorite CAC song. And that was kind of what got me back into it. It to me, it's exactly what I wanted to do, right? Like if I could pick one song from CAC to be like, this was what I wanted to do every time, it'd probably be Matt Noakes, just because it's short. It's got a couple different musical parts, which I always tried to do. The raps are really good. And there's some really high, like inside jokes and creative stuff in there. And that to me was like the jam. And that's kind of what got me like, okay, like let's do this.
Well, we're going to have to listen to that right now.
Call me a goonie cause I never say die. Leave you confused like the end of AI. I got a license to drive, like my name was either Corey. Write these rhymes down, check my spelling like Corey. But that's another story, bring the yellow gold. You can't do that on television. Gee, sorry, like Clark for Hees, make your career disappear. I'm staying up all night like my name was on a shares. Excuse me, dear, could you be more specific? I'm like, become high cause my style's horrific. Mystery, like the famous Dave Turner. When you're on a date, never rent Terra Firma or Kathy Turner. NBA Warshawski, I treat a face fat like Kelly Kapowski. Saw Screech do a stand-up just as we. All I talked about was beating up the crowd. Do the week, saved by the bell when I step on stage. Like Bret Hart said, I'm hell in a cage. Only said it once and it was an interview, but instead of seeing all you probably laugh at you. Cause I rhyme with the crew, that'll get my jokes. Like when I say this song hits like Matt Noakes. So like Steve, pretty like Paul Roma. Boca governor of Oklahoma. You're on a quest for me to see the rest of me. So I guess success is supposed to be my destiny. I catch the best TV, so repeating beats. I can say my rhyme style's deep like Cradle Lake. So here's a head, fake, a bob and a weed. Drink until I heat like it was New Year's Eve. If it were up to me, I'd make the world sing a song. Making MCs long gone like they were Radon John. Cause I'm skating while I was taking out and breaking it down. And my sounds are shaking, making MCs clowns. Take it down a notch, whether it's loud or not. Or you can shout and let it out, I doubt you sound so hot. You think it might be that you frighten me, but you're really just hype like Spike Lee. It's the BTB, here to save the scene from these fake MCs trying to make the green. I rock a mesh cap while I'm playing basketball. Drinking tall boys, I can barely taste it all. So nothing's changed at all, yeah you still know me. I'm still boasting, hosting, rookie, and a dope MC. So put your lighter in the air like this was free bird. Cause I'm not leaving till I'm sure that I was seen and heard. It's Johnny walking fuss and the mystery. Just listen, we're insisting that your history. So if you got that singing feeling like you're getting too low, better keep your ears open cause I'm letting you know you'll be sick with this cause I'm ubiquitous. And I kick this so quick that it's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's my favorite. And dude, there's so much stuff in that song. So it's funny if you listen to that. Brad made me leave it in, but at the beginning, you can hear me in the background right when the drums start, and I cough for a second. But you can hear me say, I think I say I don't remember how to rap. Remember when I used to, because Brad and I were sitting there trying to record, and I was like screaming, and that goes back to like it had been like a year, right? And he and I was struggling to get my act together. And so that's us, like, because I remember us recording, I'm like, I can't get it right. And he's like, dude, you're screaming, you're like yelling. And I was like, okay. And that's why, yeah. So he was like, leave that in. He's like, that's funny. But I'm like, yeah, I remember like when I used to be able to rap, like that was awesome. That's a true moment of like frustration. Also in there is I talk about going to see Screech do stand-up, which is a very true story. That is actually the first date that I went on with my now wife 18 years ago, and we've been together ever since. And yeah, we went and saw Screech do stand-up, and he got heckled off the stage. It was brutal. Brad's rap on there is insane. So good. He has so many rhymes. The whole like boastin', hostin', Roki, like that is crazy. And like I even got the whole like Bret Hart said hell in a cage. That was a funny thing that Sea-Dog and I, for those of you that used to watch 80s wrestling, you know, they would do the like Saturday wrestling shows where they would never show top guys wrestling other top guys. So you would watch, it was mainly for like storyline, and you would watch for like the interviews. And just this one random time, Bret Hart was threatening, I think it was Roddy Piper. He was like behind a steel cage, and he just said, I just want to remember one thing, I'm hell in a cage. And he and I said that every day for like the next 5 years. You know what I mean? It was one of those things. So I even talk about like every song's an inside joke, like when this happened. So, and Matt Noakes even is an inside joke. It's just a very inconsequential baseball player for the Detroit Tigers that like only Brad and C-Dog would probably laugh at that. That was kind of the idea.
When we do the CEC mini doc, I think it's going to be called Hell in a Cage.
It's such a great line, and it's not even a famous line. It's not, I've never seen it again. Like we've talked about, like maybe like we even made that up because it's not like a big, it was just a one-off, and we just thought that was the most funny thing. And Bret Hart's not that guy, so it even sounded funnier coming out of him, you know, being like this threatening dude. That's a great title for that. But yeah, and so then from there, then we started recording like in earnest. Like once I got my act together, then I started making beats. I all of a sudden was making, I thought, much better beats. And I was excited again. And then the Boston thing happened. So we had about an album's worth of stuff together, close to it.
Well, dude, the Heel Turn has 23 songs.
Yes. And we probably had, when the Boston thing happened, we probably had 12 or 13 that were close to finished. And when I say close to finished, this is where things got complicated because I really wanted, I like having audio samples on stuff. And part of that is, but doing the setup I had was very time consuming to get audio samples onto things. And then 2 was getting guest rappers. So this was, I mean, the timing was so short, but by this time when we were recording again, everybody's lives had changed so much. We weren't really doing these like marathon sessions together anymore. It was more like I would do the beat by myself, record if I could record first or not, have Brad come over, do his verse. And then we'd like, oh, this song would be good for C-Dog, and we'd leave it open space. We'll shoot. It might be 4 months before I see him. Right. So it went from like this really natural thing that we did the first time to kind of being a project, and that was really the big delay. Yeah, and it was just everybody was spread out. All of a sudden C-Dog was living in Salem. I mean, we were just living lives, you know, everybody was very busy. We gotten older, a little older, and then the Boston thing happened, which was great. We got introduced to these, we had a big supporter who introduced us to his friends from Boston, and they were really, and if you play music live enough, I don't know, I've had so many experiences with people coming up to me after a show and being like, wow, that was great. Here's my card. I have exciting opportunities for you, blah, blah, blah. It's the oldest story. Nothing ever happens, right? So when you first hear that, oh, these friends from Boston, they want to mess with you. It's like, well, okay. But then it really kind of was legitimate, you know, like they flew out, which blew my mind. And were really cool guys, had a lot of interest. I remember it a little differently than Brad. They were very interested, but they were from a different world. And part of why it didn't work out was really because of me. I was pretty difficult about the whole thing, as far as they simply wanted to come in. They liked the first record and they said, hey, we want to re-release this on our label and give you guys promotion, money. We will send you on a tour. Do what do they call that? Where they have like the studio guys come and see your show, like the private show,
showcase.
Yeah,
A&R.
We're like, yes, they were like, we have the means to do showcases and stuff, and I, being me, just like the people I hang out with, right? I've got to be difficult. So I was like, no, I was like, I want to do a whole record. I want to do a new record, like that one, because by this point, man, it had been out for almost 2 years. What
I'm dying to know is, so the Boston guys come in, you do the Heel Turn, 23 songs. There's the Simple Tricks and Nonsense, which is what would become the sort of second record. Somebody made a decision to re-record all those vocals from the first record. Was that you?
Oh yeah, I'm getting there. Okay, so yeah, so let's break that down. So once again, I ruined this whole thing. Brad, I think, was really nice in his breakdown of why it didn't work out. I'd say it's 90% me. I wanted to do a brand new record. They wanted to do our old record, and we kind of met in the middle. And they were like, "Let us pick," because I'd given them the new songs, and they were like, "No," like they didn't like them, and that kind of bugged me. So then that's for me. That's where I started being a little difficult. Where I was like, "Nah, I don't want to do the old thing." So we finally decided on doing a mix. They were like, we have these certain songs from your old one that we kind of insist on using. And I was like, okay. And they were like, we'll let you do some new ones. I was like, cool. So we were going to do this like mix. Part of the re-recording, so Brad and I always had, because you have to remember, a good number of those songs we recorded before we had the idea of letting anybody hear them, right? So a lot of it was just us having fun, entertaining each other. And there was always little things that we wanted to go back and fix. Some of it is, when you play stuff live enough, you kind of figure it out later. And rap's funny because you don't really practice. I don't know if other rap groups practice, but we never like sat in the basement and like practiced. It was not like because it's not like a band where you have to make sure you're on the same page and hitting the right notes. It's just like, dude, you either have your act together or you don't. Like, we're going to press play and we're going to yell over microphones for 30 minutes. So I wanted to fix things. There were swear words that we wanted to take out. That was kind of one of their things. And something that was stupid to us when we had an experience where we did an interview for radio. This is before the Boston guys. And we realized like all of our songs had one swear word except for like one. And we were like, oh, that was stupid of us, right? You either swear all over it or you don't. And so part of that, so yes. So the long-winded answer to your question, yes. I made the executive decision, let's go back and re-record all of our vocals on the old tracks, and we can fix any rhymes that we don't like. We can fix swear words and fill those out just so if things work out, that they could choose any song they like.
An incredible amount of work.
Yes, and that's also what derailed it, because we spent all this time and there were some songs, I can't remember which ones, where I messed with on the original Digital 8 file too much, where I ended up having to re-record some of the music. And I couldn't figure out like effects I do. So if you really want to nerd out on CAC, if you listen to Bill Bixby, for example, on the original CD, the Minor Threat sample is all in one ear, which was actually not on purpose. That was me not knowing how to use my 8-track.
I thought the hard left pan was pure genius and totally contrived and meant to
Yes. Happen. Yeah, everybody does. No, that was a complete accident. And where it ended up bugging me was certain places we would play would have a mono setup, and so that would be lost. So we'd play our CD, you wouldn't hear certain things if they were hard panned. So I was like, okay, well, this is a chance for me to go back and fix that. But dude, once you start fixing things, it never stops, right? You never get it right. And that's a big problem I've always had as like a producer, is just I never know when to quit. I relate to George Lucas on that, like just not knowing when to leave it alone. And to your point, you're always right the first time, right? Like I got it right on accident the first time. Why I wanted to mess with it, I can't explain to you now, other than just being in my head and being crazy. So that was that long-winded way is how we got to Simple Tricks, which for me, honestly, wasn't really something I was that excited about. If we want to be honest, 20 years later, like I never really... I'd never really set out for anything to be a living. I'm not the kind of person that could tour. I could not live in a van. Like I'm not built for that. I'm a homebody. I think my brother was, Brad definitely could live in a van and be a touring musician. He's built that way. I hate to leave my house. So like that was another thing where I was just not that excited about it. I had some experiences like when we went to master, I wanted to master where we were used to, which was Mike Lastra, who was like a hero of mine in Portland. He'd basically produced and mastered a ton of records in Portland that were like up my alley, right? Like that was my world. Like he would do like punk records, Hazel records, like any record Mike Lastra was down. And Brad and I had a great experience with him. And then I wanted to do it there. And once again, them being from a different world, they were like, no, we want to pay for like the highest price guy in Portland, which we did. And I'm not going to name his name, but it was horrible. I had a horrible time. He wasn't nice. He wasn't friendly. We were paying him an ungodly amount of money. He acted like he was annoyed that we were there. Just that experience alone was terrible. But yeah, we got, and then those masters that we got were not usable. We sent them to the guys and they were like, we don't like them. So we ended up getting it mastered by like one of Brad's friends. And once we got the master together, they had released another album and it didn't do as well as they thought. Right. And this is what I remember. So like they got to this point where they released this other record before ours, and it was totally different from ours. It was not a rap record at all. But it just didn't work. And then I guess some other stuff came up. I mean, we got to the point where we were so close to releasing it. They even sent us a box of, I have it somewhere, of just like promo. It was a choice of like all these logos. Like they had people working on it. It was crazy. But then it all fell through, right? And so then Brad and I were left with, well, crap. Now we have these new songs. And so then I was like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to release this like weird, half and half record where I don't want to have like, I'm not going to re-release half of our old songs. To me, that just seems so cheap. So that's when we were like, let's double down and do this big album, because we already had a lot of it recorded. And part of that is we were doing some different stuff. And I always thought that like, if you're going to do different things, it's always safer to hide them in a bigger group of songs. So if you do like a 10-song record and you have 3 that you think are kind of like weird, that's not going to play well, right? But if you have 20 songs and 3 of them are weird, you can kind of sneak them in. And that was the idea behind the whole, what became the heel turn, was like, let's just do this gigantic record. It's been long enough. But then that became a problem in and of itself, because we had a bunch of guest spots we couldn't fill, a bunch of audio samples I wanted but couldn't like figure out. It became this nightmare.
It's so funny to look at the state of like trap beats and samples today, where, you see these guys on Twitter and they're like, stop sample snitching. And, it's like, it's a free for all. It is a frigging, like, I was in the studio getting a tape mastered a couple of weeks ago, and the guy, he does a lot of like local rappers, and all these guys, they come in and they just want to rip stuff off YouTube and use it as a beat. And it's just, that was in 2004, it was still that era, it was right on the cusp of that big change. So it's so funny to look back on, I think, now.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story about sampling. The only thing I ever sampled, the only music that I ever sampled for CAC was the opening, that little bass part from Salad Days by Minor Threat. And I did it just because I could. My now wife, had an SK. Is it an SK1? Like the old Casio, right. Like one of those mini Casios. If you remember, they had the little drum pads on them, but you could sample like, I think it was like up to 3 seconds. And that is what I used to sample that Minor Threat record. So I played it through my stereo, and then I had it hooked into that SK1. And so I'd played the opening part and I got it onto one of those drum pads. And then I got the second part on the other drum pad. And so if you listen to Bill Bixby, it's literally me live pressing the drum pad every time for the sample. So it's not even looped. But when we did CAC, that was the first band I'd really been in where like sometimes we would have, it was weird, man. We would play some shows and there would be, like you were saying on the last podcast with Brad, the show at the Tonic, there was like 100 people there. And I only knew some of them, which was crazy to me. But then sometimes we would go play the next month at the same venue and there'd be like 12 people. So it was always a mixed bag. But CAC was definitely the first band that I was in where we had strangers that were into us, and it wasn't a lot, but it was still a really cool experience. I remember Brad once got like noticed on the street, and that was like the big thing that like made it for him, right? Somebody was like, hey, like, are you into CAC? And he was like, oh my God.
Famous in Portland.
Yeah, very, right. And well, no. So, so funny thing about us, and I'll say this here, is that we were famous in Salem. So the funny thing is that, so the Widgets are like a year or two younger than me, and they were big, pretty to look at fans, and they're great musicians in their own right. And they did what Matt and I couldn't do, which is they kind of created a whole thing in Salem. So the Widgets are the best example of like, they are straight up famous in Salem, Oregon, right? Like when the Widgets broke up, dude, they were on the like front page of the lifestyle section of the Statesman Journal, which is like the newspaper. Yes. So in Salem, they created this whole thing. They were very popular, but only in Salem, which is crazy to me. So they also worked at like the record store in Salem. And so during this whole time, they would put out in the newspaper like the best-selling stuff at Ranch Records, which was like the big record store in Salem. And they would always put CAC in there for like 2 years. And since all the kids looked up to the Widgets, all the kids in Salem would buy the CAC. And so Brad and I had this really funny, I'll tell this funny story. So like we played this show in Salem. It was our first time playing there. And it's where Brad and I grew up, but we were both living in Portland. And so we went to play a show with the Widgets, and it was at this like very well lit coffee shop. And there was probably like 60 something kids there already. And I will never forget us walking in. And Brad and I at this point, man, we were the height of scumbags, right? We were like in our early 20s, just drinking a lot. I think I had like I had like a Hulk Hogan mustache, just being dirtbags, and rolled into this show in Salem, this all ages show. And there was high school kids that were like whispering, like, that one's Walking Fuss. Hey, look, that's Biff Bocaroba. And I remember Brad and I freaked out, just freaked out. And it was probably only like 10 kids that said it, you know what I mean? But like, I've never before or after had that experience. And we both were like, oh shit. And I'll never forget, we went, so just like dirtbags, man, we left our friends to go play their set, went to a bar that was like 2 doors down and just started drinking. And at some point, somebody just walked down and we're like, we didn't even tell anybody where we were going. So they had to come find us, which was not on purpose, just being idiots. And they were like, you're on. And I'll never forget, dude, I was so nervous. I drank so much at that bar. I remember stumbling back to this coffee shop and I do not remember playing the show. And I remember asking later, like, were we good? And they're like, yeah, it was great. And I was like, wow, and drunk rapping is the worst thing ever, by the way.
Dude, there's nothing that clashes like oil and water worse than alcohol and trying to be articulate with your words.
Yes. And that was another experience where I knew that we weren't built for anything more, right? I was like, if just playing a coffee shop got us like, it was just that idea of being like something to somebody was just, it was so terrifying. And also, man, playing in bright lights.
Did you guys get liquored up before a lot of shows, or was that kind of a one-off?
That was by far the drunkest. I don't remember if Brad was that drunk. I know I was. Not so much. And definitely as things progressed, we would probably do more and more. If you look at those early shows, like we're hardcore, like drinking water and being good and all of that. But once we got better, I've never been that drunk on stage before or after. Not too much. No, because the alcohol messes with your throat. Right? Like beer's terrible when you're trying to like yell into a mic. No, what honestly messed with me back in the day was smoke. So whenever we would play bars, my voice would go out every single time because I've never smoked. And playing in those smoked out places would just, so we had a lot of shows where by the end I could barely get words out. And it was also because like when we played live, if you hear it on the Tonic show, I'm just screaming, right? Yeah. I'm just yelling. But a lot of times, I would throw my voice out almost every time.
Back when you could still smoke in those tiny little bars and everybody was smoking.
Yeah, and you talk about timing. It was like right about the time that we finished playing was when they outlawed that, right? I was like, well, I would have loved to have had that because we played all ages shows. It was great.
So what, isn't Blitz and Trapper from Salem?
Yes, those are, I know a couple of the dudes in that. I went to grade school with one of them. Have you heard of the band Typhoon?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Typhoon is like Typhoon is kind of the like Salem band done good. So they basically, they're the Salem band that kind of made it big-ish. Like they ended up playing on Letterman and had some other stuff, but they were kids that were younger than the Widgets, and those were the kids that were like big Widget fans and ended up taking it, up. Blitz and Trapper, even though they're from Salem, I would consider them more of a Portland band.
And that's kind of, everybody associates CAC with Portland, but really, you guys are Salem to the core.
Well, and we repped Portland, right? Because like we were both living there, but it was funny that we ended up still being more popular in our hometown than we ever were in Portland. So like we would go down and play shows in Salem. After that first experience, we were like, oh. So we would go down and play with the Widgets in Salem and always have big turnouts, whether we were at bars or all ages. So it was kind of funny being down there and still seeing, people that were into us that I didn't know. But yeah, I would still say we were a Portland band just because we were living there at the time. Just like with Blitz and Trapper, I'm pretty sure they were living in Portland when they got to where they got. But like the Widgets, dude, like they lived in Salem. They were Salem, which I respected about them. They're if anybody out there's never heard the Widgets, they're amazing. They're one of my all-time favorites.
I remember seeing, I don't know if it was a tribute show. It was one of the last CSC live performances, I think. I don't know what year it was, but you guys were playing the Ash Street, and you'd played 2 shows. You played a show in Salem, drove up to Portland to play the Ash Street, and I was like, geez, man, these guys are...
Dude, that whole story's crazy. So, yeah, it's funny, as much stuff as I've done musically, I've maybe booked 5 shows in my whole time. So I've never been that kind of a driving force. Brad... Walkin' Fuss was the guy that got everything done for us as far as on that end. So he was the promotion guy. He was the guy that got us all of our shows. So he had scheduled a show with us and the Buttery Lords and somebody at the Ash Street. And then like a month later, the Widgets decided that they were going to go their separate ways and they were going to have this big like final show, and they wanted us to play. So we were all very good friends with them. And I was also, at that time, I had started playing in a band with Nick and Becky and Doug. So 3/4 of the Widgets, I started playing in a band with them called the Dearling Darlings. And so we were like, hey, the Dearling Darlings can open. David from the Widgets had another band. So it was like, he can play in the second band. The CAC could play third because we all have, we've been playing shows, and then the Widgets would play their final show. Well, it sucked because it ended up being scheduled on the same day as this show we had scheduled in Ash Street. And to Brad's credit, man, he was like, I'm not going to back out of it. He was like, there's no way. He's like, I'd feel bad for, the Buttery Lords. And also we just look bad to the Ash Street. And so we played. So, dude, I played a set with the Dearling Darlings. Then I played a full set with CAC. The part that sucked is we had to leave halfway through the Widgets' last show. So I got them to play like my favorite song like early. So I like begged them like play Wrath of Zeus. I remember screaming Wrath of Zeus, and they played that, and then we had to leave, drive to Portland, and then play a whole nother CAC show.
Exhausting.
And and the Ash Street show had about 15 people there.
Well,
so we went from playing. Yeah. So you remember, so that show was pretty lackluster. That was that was ironic. That was one of our lowest attended shows in a long time. And we had just left this like gigantic show, where we played, I think Brad and I played for almost an hour. I remember being really sweaty. And I remember that show, speaking of drunk, just because Brad and I wouldn't get wasted before shows doesn't mean our crew wouldn't. So I remember that night, Sea-Dog was in rare form, and I remember having to like corral him and get him to perform. So we had this whole sweaty long show, and then just to get in your car and drive an hour,
draining.
Yeah,
I mean, you get like we were talking earlier, every song being a 10-round boxing match, cardio wise. You get off stage, you get in your car, it's it, man. It's game. You're over. Done to drive, all the way to Portland to do it all over again. Yeah, it's rough.
Well, and for us, the tough thing is we knew, 90% of the people that came to see us were our friends. And so for that night, we were like, we know everyone's going to be at this Widget show because we had kind of cross-pollinated everybody at that point, right? So like we knew we felt bad because we weren't going to draw anybody, or not. I shouldn't say anybody because you were there, but like most of the people that were going to see us were going to be in Salem that night, and so I felt bad just because we drew nobody. And yeah, I remember there was like 3 ladies that danced throughout our entire show. That was the only thing that got me through it. There was like 3 drunk ladies that just happened to be there. And when you play rap music, dude, and there's people that are drunk, they'll get into it.
Yeah, I definitely took CAC shows for granted. I should have, looking back on it, you just thought I would go on forever. I've never been a guy that wants to be like at the front of the stage. I'm usually in the back, chilling in the cut. But I'm just.
Oh, I am too.
So the Dearling Darlings, that's Nick and Becky were in the Widgets.
Yeah. So Dearling Darlings came about because the Widgets were they were slowly breaking up. Well, I should say the Widgets, those dudes all grew up playing music together. And so that was the only band any of them had ever been in. And just as we were getting older, they were kind of, going their separate ways. And Nick and Becky, I had recorded music of my own under a name, Go for Glory, for years. Just, it was all me. It was just stuff that I would do in my spare time. I think I've played maybe 3 shows under that name, but it was never anything that I was trying to like do. But it was just, when I would write songs, I would record the drums, the bass, and all that stuff, and just put them out on these little CDs. And Nick and Becky were always like my number one fans. Becky especially was always like she's the hands down number one Go for Glory fan, probably the only Go for Glory big number one fan. So when the Widgets were kind of doing their own thing, for that reason, Nick and Becky approached me and were just like, we want to still play music. Do you want to do something? And I was like, sure, let's let's do that. So we were all friends and hanging out anyways. And then ironically, we were like, well, we need a drummer. Who can we find? And then we were like, well, Doug plays drums. And so we ended up, not on purpose, basically just doing 3/4 of the Widgets and me. And then that was the Dearling Darlings, which is named after a Feelings record. Feelings are this very unsung band from Portland that all of us were just obsessed with. They were a band that was around for maybe 2 years. We would see them whenever they played, and we were just really into them. And they had a song called Dearling Darling. And so we're like, well, we'll name ourselves that. And then Doug ended up moving to Florida. And so we spent an awkward time without a drummer. And being a drummer, I know I never had trouble getting work, right? Like it's easy when you're a drummer to find bands because nobody ever wants to be the drummer. And Nick and Becky, luckily through their connections at Ranch and just knowing everybody, they knew this kid, Devin Gallagher. And I say kid because he was literally a kid. I mean, we were in our mid-20s, just drunk buffoons, and we ended up getting a drummer who was a senior in high school. This kid Devin, and he was one of the drummers in the band I mentioned earlier, Typhoon, and he also had his own band called the Black Black Black, which have a great 45. He was a really smart guy, really good kid, and we just corrupted him. So we were able to, and I actually didn't know because he was actually really good, but he was able to like drive us places and all of that. But so yeah, we played pretty steady for I want to say about a year and a half. I really liked all the songs that we did. And then this is a true testament to just how motivated yet unmotivated we can all be, is that so we recorded a bunch of stuff. We had a whole album's worth of stuff. And then Nick and Becky decided that they were going to move to Austin. Brad and I always planned on putting it out, and we just never did. It was just one of those things that just, I think we were all satisfied to have it, and I'm really happy with it. I think it's some of the best stuff that any of us ever did, and it just never came out. And so now we got the Walkin' Fuss record out, and that's a real like new record that Brad worked really hard on.
The Stallion out now, available wherever music gets sold.
Crazy good. After that, we're gonna finally release this Widgets record. The Dearling Darlings record, and then I'm talking with them. We also recorded I recorded 3 songs of theirs back in 2001 that all ended up on their second album, but they're very different. And so we're finally going to like release those and just let people hear them, because I don't think anyone's ever heard them other than the 5 of us. And so that'll be coming out on Sly as well. So we have a new Widgets EP, and then also the Dearling Darlings album will hopefully be out in the next couple months
with the bonus deep cuts. So who's playing drums on Japanese Word for Pigeon? Is that Devin or Doug?
That is Devin. So Devin's on all the recordings. He's a great drummer. But yeah, he was 18. God bless his heart. He was 18 at that time. And Darlings, we were very, Nick and I would keep a lot of this stuff together. Becky's a very fun bandmate, and she's also she's punk without knowing it. So she was always hard to corral into like getting into practice and all of that. But yeah, so I think for Devin, it was probably a fun experience, which is funny. At the time, I had the same experience, man. When I was 19, I played drums in this really great band called the Putouts with Onug from CAC. So Nate was in that band. This guy, Ryan Slattum, who was an amazing songwriter, and our friend Scotty, who was also really talented. And so I got sucked into this band when I was 19, and they were all like 25. And I remember feeling so excited and so like it was such a learning experience. So it was a trip to be on the other end of that, to now I was the 26-year-old dirtbag who was like, showing up drunk to practice for this poor 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's a champ, man. And I think those songs turned out great, even though it took us 15 years to get them done and released.
Let's listen to Japanese Word for Pigeon, the Dearling Darlings, Devin on drums.
And tied a note around his left leg.
That song is amazing, dude. It just is like, dude, that song kicks ass for like hard, for real.
That song is a wonderful testament to Nick Samarin, who is, it's funny, I've talked with him about this. He was born to be the second guitar player. That's like what he likes. So that song's all built around, he wrote a lot of that, but that little opening line is just so catchy, right? That little guitar line.
Oh, yeah. And the drums are so good.
Yeah.
Oh, man, dude. And then at the end, come on, Pajan.
Yeah.
Oh, dude. I mean, that whole song, dude, that song really kicks ass.
Yeah, I love that stuff, and it's fun. That was one of the bands that I was able to finally give up some sort of control in, just because I respected those guys so much. So I would actually, I would take, like, especially Nick's opinion. But no, dude, that's a great testament to Samarin, who the dude loves to play the like second guitar line. So if you play any chords, he can just come up with the coolest stuff over it. Never solos, right? Just that perfect like second guitar,
melodic.
Yes, very much so. And it's just it's just his whole calling. Because I joke with him about that. I'm like, it must be a bummer for you to play guitar by yourself, right? Because like he has nothing to play along with, because that's really what he's into. He's into just adding that second piece, which I'm terrible at. So for the two of us, it was really easy to play together. And then, Becky's got her own sort of like energy and stuff. And she, especially live, she's really fun. But yeah, I love that stuff. I don't know why, like I said, we never ended up getting around to releasing it. So, and cool side story. So The Feelings was that band that we were super obsessed with, and with their lead in The Feelings was Ralph Yotes, who was the drummer in early like Built to Spill stuff. And so Ralph was the lead guy in The Feelings, and so we were all really into him. And Brad and I, through a whole separate side thing, the CAC ended up opening for one of Ralph's bands. And so the Dearling Darlings, I got us on that bill as well. And so we opened, and I remember poor Devin had a show where he was playing in two bands. So he literally was at a different show, organized it so he could leave that show. He opened, leave that show, came over to ours, played drums on our set, and then immediately left to go play with Typhoon back at the other show. So like he opened and closed at this one show and then played opening at ours, which I thought was nuts. But we got to meet Ralph and got his permission to use the name, which was a big deal for all of us. Even though, same thing, he's like Portland famous, right? But to us, he was like Lord Jesus Christ. So
well, when the Butteries dropped that song and they did that video, man, that was epic. That was big. It was so true.
It's such a great song. I always love that concept. Matt and I had this phrase that we would use where we would be like, oh, is that guy a big deal? And we'd say, no, he's Chris Brady famous. So Chris Brady to us was like just a god. He was the bass player in Pond. And Pond to Matt and I was like the end all be all, and to David from the Widgets. But to us at the time in high school, we thought Pond they were it. They were like the perfect band. Dude, if you've never listened to Pond, their second record is just, it's perfect. It's a perfect album. As far as if I could make that, that's like what I would do.
I will be checking out Pond as soon as this is over.
They're so good. The Practice of Joy Before Death is it's an amazing record.
I've heard that title.
Yeah, well, that's because I stole it, right? For the CAC, I stole it for The Practice of Beer Before Sleep. And I work it into one of our raps. It's A Practice of Joy Before Death. Yeah.
That's what.
So once again, You just found an Easter egg live on air,
dude,
my friend.
It's what audience engagement. you guys knew about engagement before engagement was even a thing.
We were engaging on accident,
dude.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
So Chris Brady famous was our way of saying like famous in Portland, where it's just like, and there's so many guys like that. Like when we grew up in. I mean, Pete Krebs to me was he still is like just an amazing. I never understood how he never got gigantic. And he's a guy that if you grew up in Salem or Portland, like you're a big fan of Pete Krebs. And I don't know if he has a presence outside of Oregon, and it's just one of those things that it never quite works for whatever reason. But to me, God, he's still just a legend. But yeah, dude, I love that idea of, and the Butteries captured it so perfectly with famous in Portland.
When he says that one verse, it's like you're not famous, you're Portland famous. There's a difference. Right. And I was like that. I'm famous too, right? Just that idea, like, yeah, you're famous. I'm famous too, man. I'm famous in Portland, and like,
and that's so true. Like there was a time where I would walk around and people would. I at one time was in CAC, right? I had, but I also was working I was a karaoke host for a time at Chopsticks. And so there's times, especially like my wife used to comment on when we first met, where she's like, people just like everywhere we go, people know you. And I'm like, it's really nice because if people call me Eric, I know that I know them from one way or another, but I had this whole section of people that would just call me Biff. And that was my karaoke handle and that was my rap name. And so it was really handy for me. So people would be like, Biff, I'd be like, hey, it's like, it must be from Chopsticks or a show. And it was that idea of like, you do start thinking like, wow, I'm famous here. I'm famous in Portland, but I go to Chicago, not one person's going to know who I am.
I always want to know, where does Biff Pokeroba come from? What is that? Is that a wrestling thing?
No, it's actually a baseball thing. So Brad and I have some common loves, which are, as we already talked about, rap, but specifically just that crazy late 80s to early 90s run of rap where dudes were just out of their own heads. That was a big thing for us. But also we were raised playing baseball, and like our whole formative like early years and when I say raised playing baseball, I mean nothing but like we were. The only thing that we did was baseball, was read about it, talk about it, play it. My dad was a competitive baseball player, and so that was like his whole thing. And so, yeah, dude, growing up, I don't remember not having a baseball card collection. One of my very first cognizant memories is I was like 3 or 4 sitting in the stands of a baseball game, opening a pack of baseball cards, knowing I already had a collection, if that's crazy to do. And so Brad and I just had this great love for like these old baseball names. So when we first started rapping, we had like terrible nicknames. I think I was E-Rock, which I had just stolen from a guy in the coop.
There's a lot of E-Rocks. We'll put it that way.
A lot of E-Rocks. And if you want the best, for my money, the best rap song ever made, it is Fat Cat's Big a Fish by The Coop, the COUP. Best song ever. And the other dude in The Coop, so there's Boots Riley, but the other guy is E-Rock. When I was in high school, I was like, yeah, I'll just steal that. I'm E-Rock. The sad thing is when I was playing music, I always went by Eric B, because I was never that big of a fan of my last name, just because of the...
If you're in a band where you're playing an instrument, that was Eric B.
Then I was Eric B, just because, ironically, dude, there was 2 presidents, right, with that last name, but also in Salem was founded by this family called the Bushes.
Oh, so in between 2000 and 2004, you're
not
Bush,
a good time.
I mean, dude,
not a good time. Yeah, and especially in Portland, right? And so I never liked the last name, and so when I was playing like music, like non-rap music, I went by Eric B. Well, when we started rapping, it couldn't be Eric B because there was already Eric B and Rakim, right? I'm not gonna be that stupid.
That's the name.
And so so Brad and I decided like let's go back and pull some like sweet old baseball names. And Johnny Walkenfuss was a catcher / like utility player for the Tigers, and Brad has always loved him. And so he was like, I'll be Johnny Walkenfuss. And I just picked, there was a backup catcher for the Braves for many years named Biff Pokeroba.
Dude, what a great, these are Easter eggs. I thought I knew everything about you guys. I had no idea these are real people and baseball people. I thought Walkenfuss was his alter ego wrestling name. And I thought Biff Pokeroba was some made up. I can't believe these are real guys and real baseball players.
There's a real human being that walked our earth named Biff Pokeroba. The irony is that, and the luck for me is that I spelled it wrong. So the real Biff Pokeroba spells it's P-O-C-O, and I happen to spell it P-O-C-A. The luck in that is that nobody's taken it for anything. It's like a nonsense word. So it's like my email, it's everything. I can be Pokeroba because I happen to spell it wrong. Because we didn't take the forethought to actually look at a baseball card before we use these names. But then we ended up giving all the CAC guys like alternate baseball names. So like Talik, who is a great bass player who played bass on a couple songs, he was Al Bumbry, which is a real baseball player. I'm trying to think of the other ones. I know we gave Fargo was like Manny Trio. Just these wonderful baseball names we had. But yeah, dude, Walkenfuss and Pokeroba, those are old baseball polls.
Dude, your baseball references are deep in those CAC records. I mean, from McKendo, Billy Martin. If I was a pitcher, you'd be Don Baylor. I mean, dude, that line killed me when it came out because, I'm a halfway baseball fan, not like you guys. You know, I got a collection of baseball cards, too, from the 80s. But, if I was a pitcher, you'd be Don Baylor. He holds the record for getting hit by a pitch. So if you're not a baseball fan,
I mean, it's genius. Now you understand the diss. Yeah, I was always very happy with that. That's actually one of my, I feel like that's one of my better ones. And that once again goes back to like, if you throw enough stuff out there, right, it sticks with certain people. And so that was kind of our thing, was like, dude, like it's not cool in 2000 to be into like underground music, but also like baseball and 80s wrestling.
Yeah.
And it's funny now because some of that seems to be romanticized, like now it's cool. But I'll tell you what, dude, living through it in 2000, no one thought I was cool for being into Randy Savage from 1987. That was not like,
right. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that was not like a point of pride.
For the third time on this podcast, dare I say, brave, risky, daring. This is the uniqueness of what you guys did. Yeah.
And it was also just like, we, you know, if we're into it, you know, somebody else is into it. So like, I'm glad that you got that, right? So it's like, yeah, you throw like a Billy Martin reference in the middle of a rap song and you're like, oh, like I get that. And I love that in rap songs too. Like I love when I get it. And then sometimes I can tell there's references that I don't get. And that makes me curious. I'm like, what is that about? You know, and sometimes you hear something later and you're like, oh, I get it now. And that's always what I loved about rap. That's what's so unique about it. Cause you can't really do that with like, I guess you could do that with like rock music, but it's not as fun, you know? Whereas you can just scream out like 85 references in a minute and just hope somebody, you know, finds them.
Yeah. The other big one was I run this like Vance Johnson on speed, going 12 rounds like you're Apollo Creed. That was the other one that always resonated with our little group of friends. Like every time I'd come on, it'd be like, you know, we'd have that extra little vitriol when we were saying it back.
Dude, the one that always cracks me up is Brad has the great line. I'm really jealous of it. I come from all angles like a Kent to Culvey. And I was like, oh man, because if you knew old baseball, man, that guy was a pitcher for the Pirates, ugly as sin. And that was his whole thing. He would throw sidearm, underhand, like submarine, overhand. And I was like, dude, he comes from all angles like he's Kent to Culvey. And once again, if you know,
Deep.
and Sea Dog of all of our crew had insane baseball knowledge. So if anything, it would impress him, right? So those are lines that we would stick in there for him, where he'd be like, because like Fargo doesn't know baseball from anything,
right?
But so you're throwing all these different lines in for people, and yeah, dude. But I'm come from all angles like I'm Kent to Culvey. It's just a crazy line,
dude. Yeah, I mean, they're just deep baseball references, you know. But that's, you know, like that's I was talking with your brother last week. I think it's a good segue because I know you're a huge Stallone fan, but you know, Frank Stallone is quite the guitar connoisseur. He shops at a very high-end guitar store in Burbank called Norm's Rare Guitars, but he's also in one of my favorite movies of all time, which is Barfly. And you know, your brother would always reference Bukowski, Socrates, you know, all these famous literary characters talking about critical thinking, you know, really deep topics to be trying to rap about. But so we really connected on that level. And so I thought, I don't know if you remember a couple of obscure Stallone movies that really stuck with me as a kid, because, you know, my old man dragged me out to go see them, and they just really landed on top of me like a ton of bricks. One was Cobra, and the other one was Over the Top. And so I just was wondering, you know, where they ranked. And I was looking at the Stallone rank of movies on Rotten Tomatoes, you know, going kind of down the list. And I was just curious what your list is.
dude. Well, it's tough, man. Over the Top is up there. It's one of his best. I mean, it's so ridiculous, right? It's such a ludicrous movie. Cobra's almost too over the top. It's almost winking at you. Like Cobra almost knows that it's bad, which it's funny. I could talk movies all day, by the way. So like with Brad, yeah, well, with Brad, that was always his big thing, right? Is he was much more of a literary guy, and my thing at the time, and still is, was just movies. Like I love movies, but I love bad movies, but I don't love bad movies that know they're bad. There's a big difference there, right? So whenever I mention like bad movies, people are like, oh, like Sharknado. It's like, no, Sharknado. It's telling you it's bad. I love when somebody really tries and fails, like for some reason, because you feel it, right? You feel somebody's effort.
You feel it like a toothpick hanging out of your mouth, lighting
like
up with
a Cobra.
Your twin personalized 45s in your. You remember that car?
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. So Stallone's another one of those things I can't remember not being a fan when I was a kid, dude. Rocky was just my favorite stuff. Rocky, the Rocky IV. Rocky 2. Rocky 2 is my all-time favorite Stallone. That's the best movie for me. Rocky 2, closely followed by Rocky 1, but for me, Rocky 2 is better.
Dude, and even like cinema people will give him a lot of credit for writing Rocky. And I guess, I don't know, they wrote it in like a week or 3 days or whatever the story goes, but that's like it's kind of regarded as like a high mark of, 70s cinema.
Yeah. I think it's impossible to watch that movie like you would have in 76 because you can't help but not know him, right? So it's got to be weird now. I can't imagine now watching that for the first time being like, well, that's Stallone, But I think when that came out, yeah, dude, people are saying he was like the next Brando and all this crazy stuff. But I think that whole story is what people like. The fact that like he insisted on being in it. He insisted on being the writer and the star. They wanted to buy the script from him and just had to push him on. And he was like, nope, I'm going to do this thing. And he's such a like lucky story. And the fact that things just worked out, because really by all other stories, he should have ended up a dirtbag or stayed a dirtbag. He's a poor guy done good.
When you're hungry and you don't have anything, it's so much harder to hang on to that creation that is yours. I mean, that's probably why you guys resonate. I mean, because I'm not letting go. I'm hands on. I'm doing everything.
Dude sold his dog to make money. You know what I mean? Ended up buying his dog back when he got paid for the script. Like just crazy stuff like that. In the 70s too, were just such a wild time. I mean, the fact that you even have to sell your dog is crazy. But yeah, dude. So Stallone wise, I won't talk about him too much. But yeah, Rocky 2 is up there. Over the Top is certainly one of his better ones. But yeah, I've seen every one of his movies like a lot of times. It's scary. Yeah. And like I would say, I've always told people I unironically like him, like it's not like I think he's a joke. Like especially his early work. If you watch his stuff from the 70s, it's good.
Dude,
it's legitimately good.
Rocky is a powerhouse film. Talia Shire,
oh, yeah.
Burgess Meredith. I mean, dude.
Rocky, and that's where he doubled down on Rocky 2. So Rocky gets all of the attention, but Rocky 2 has so many themes that are really strong. Like if you go back and watch Rocky 2, I mean, it kind of tells his whole, he's telling his life story like as it's happening. So basically he gets famous, he gets money, and he just blows it all because he's dumb. And then they're like, you have to fight. It's almost like he had to make Rocky 2 because his other movies after that failed, Yeah. But in Rocky 2, dude, he lowers that character so low. You can't help but feel bad for him. I mean, he ends up trying to do commercials and he can't read. And that's just sad. Then he ends up working at like a meat packing plant. And it goes so dark.
Yeah.
And, and then he ends up fighting and like his wife can't even attend the fight. There's just so much of that. Like if you've ever been poor, like Rocky 2 for me just speaks a little louder than the first one, just because he made it and then had to suffer the like humiliation, which is to me even crazier, right?
The fading glory.
Yes. And he's got like the newspapers being like, why are you a loser? Like that's even worse than ever making it in the first place. So I feel like that's his kind of crowning achievement, that one. And I'm on the wrong end of this, but I really like his movie Paradise Alley. I think even he doesn't like it, but I think it really works. That's a loss.
I was going to quiz you. I've got the Rotten Tomatoes percentages. And what's your guess as to the highest rated Stallone movie?
Highest rated's got to be, it's either got to be Rocky or it's going to be something stupid like The Expendables.
Creed, believe it or not.
Oh, 2015. Yeah. I don't even know if I consider that a Stallone movie, but yeah.
But Rocky is it's neck and neck. They're kind of tied. So Rocky, the original Rocky. So what's your guess for the worst rated?
Worst has got on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got to be Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
It's down there, but it's actually Get Carter.
Really? See, that's crazy. I love that movie. Funny story about Get Carter is that came out on my birthday in 2001, and I actually brought like 15 friends to that. I made them go see Get Carter for my birthday. That was our preamble to going out to Chopsticks.
Cobra is about right above it for the worst rated, and Don't Stop or My Mom Will Shoot is actually right. It's like in the middle of the pack.
I just rewatched that not too long ago, and it's still bad. It's a bad movie, and I want to be able to say like it's good and like people are wrong about it, but it's so bad, and it's not even fun bad. You know what I mean? Like there's like Cobra's not a good movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's fun though. Like I could sit down and watch Cobra. Like it's entertaining. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot makes the criminal error of just not even being fun to watch. Like, it's just bad.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking, some of these ratings when you get into them. You know, Rambo's kind of in the mix, but Expendables pretty high. But yeah, Don't Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. I mean, what was the original screenplay title for that movie, and who was the Hollywood cocaine executive that changed that title? Man, that's what I want to know. But
yeah, they all, it's one of those things. I think he claims it was more of like a dark comedy and all of this, but I'm like, there's still no way that that's a good movie, right? There's just no way. It has some charming little moments, but like, it's just when the main character is annoying, I think that never works. That's kind of the whole basis of that movie, is that his mom is always in his way, but you're supposed to like sympathize with her, but you don't. And it's one of those things where like, if you can't get behind one of the characters, then you're kind of lost. You have to root for somebody.
Judge Dredd and Lockup are kind of like riding the bottom of the pack, and the only thing worse is Cobra, Get Carter, and then Rhinestone. Do you remember that one?
Oh, dude, I've seen that. Yeah,
1984.
You have to remember, I've owned all of these. I've seen all of these more than like 10 times. It's sad, but yeah. Rhinestone is not good. Rhinestone is actually, it's funny. He's actually the low point of that. Dolly's great in it, and it has a lot of funny parts. It's just Stallone's not funny, and people have always said he's funny, and he's never proven it. He's not. And I say that I'm the man's biggest supporter, but like, he's a good dramatic actor, I think, if he's given the right stuff. But like, he's a great action actor too. But dude, his comedies are just not good. Even Oscar's a funny movie. He is not funny in it, if that makes sense. Like, yeah. But dude, yeah, Rhinestone's not great. It's more fun to look back on it now from like a historical perspective, just to see how wild it looks, and like everybody's clothes and the music and stuff. But I think he's got worse stuff than that. But
I'll give you, what do you think the second worst movie is on Rotten Tomatoes? It's right next to Get Carter. They're like neck and neck.
They said Get Carter's the worst. That's crazy to me. For me, I think Driven is one of his worst movies.
Dude, that's low? The third worst, which is crazy. But I don't know. This is so obscure. I had never heard of this movie. It's called Avenging Angelo.
Oh yeah. That's not good. That's it's a direct-to-video of his from like '02. He had a weird period there for a couple of years where he was dangerous to going direct-to-video. So he has a couple like that. Avenging Angelo is not a good movie. I'll give them that. It's not his. It shouldn't be that low. But dude, I struggle with all of those ratings systems because they definitely skew towards the newer stuff, right?
Right. Yeah, Rotten Tomatoes is not accurate by any stretch of the means. But I just, I thought it'd be a cool Stallone game,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, Driven's a bad movie. That is, dude, it's about car racing and all the cars are like CGI.
Right.
Like, who wants to see that?
And it was 2001 CGI, which is...
So it's not good. And, don't get me going on that. The whole excitement of a car chase is that it's real people and real cars, right? Like, you're supposed to be impressed with like, wow, they pulled this off. Once you do CGI cars, what are we doing? Like, what are we here for?
Right. It's the same. It's like the Top Gun shot, where it's just a headshot of a really intense dude, either, like a Top Gun, they're flying. And so, but it's the same kind of cinematic style. It's just that headshot, eyes through the helmet.
At least in Top Gun, they have a shot of a real plane. You know what I mean? At least it's not a computer,
right? Yeah, that was 87. So, but that was from an aviation standpoint, it's pretty remarkable amount of aviation cinematography. But De Niro versus Stallone, grudge match. Where do you stand on that one?
It's not good. I got a couple beefs with that movie. One is that they kind of, I don't know. I don't feel like they gave De Niro a very good character to play. And I'm not a big fan of Kevin Hart. I don't find him to be that funny. And so he is in a lot of that. And I don't feel like they needed him. But it's also it just doesn't work. It's a weird premise to me.
31% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I was excited when I heard about it, but then the actual like payoff of it just is not great. That one I've not seen as much as some of his other recent stuff, just because it wasn't that fun for me.
Well, it's, last one, because you mentioned it as one of your favorites, Paradise Alley, 1978. That's like right after Rocky. And I've never
Yeah.
I've never seen this movie. I've never heard of it. But what's your guess where that rates on Rotten Tomatoes?
Oh, I'm sure it's really low. It's got to be down there. And if not, it's only because people haven't seen it.
40%.
Yeah,
It's right in the middle.
Right. So what? He's a fascinating guy in just that. So we talked about, his rise was really quick as far as he had this like magical Cinderella story, right? Where he gets the script. And granted, he was in stuff before Rocky, right? But it was all like pretty low rent. And then he gets this great script and kind of not tricks them. He kind of forces his way into being the star. And then he becomes this big deal. And he follows that up with a movie called Fist that doesn't really work, but he's like, okay, whatever. And then the very next movie he gets to make is called Paradise Alley, which is like, it's based on his script. He's allowed to like write and direct and star, because remember back then he was supposed to be this like big dramatic thing. And he was considered like a writer and all of this stuff. Dude, there's even a Paradise Alley book. Like that's how far they took it. And so by that point, people are ready to turn on him, right? So the biggest mistake he makes is he puts out this movie, Paradise Alley, and it's all him. He has no one else to blame. And I love it because I'm a Stallone fan, but I can be objective and tell you it doesn't really work. It's a movie about like Hell's Kitchen in the like, I want to say the 40s. And the whole plot revolves around his brother being a like underground wrestler. So already within like, he already had one failure, and then his very next movie, he goes back to kind of the Rocky formula, and people were just like not having it. And the guy he cast as his younger brother was like an unknown. It's him, Armand Assante, in I think like his first role. And this other guy whose name I can't place, Lee Canalito, I want to say was his name. And I love it, but it's a weird movie. Wrestling fans out there would take note that Terry Funk is in Paradise Alley, as well as a small role from Tom Waits.
Jesus, you go deep.
I can also tell you that Stallone regular Joe Spinell is in it, who was Rocky's mob boss from the first Rocky, and also Frank McRae, who is in a lot of early Stallone films. And you'd recognize him if you saw him, but
Dude, I mean, Paradise Alley, written, directed, and stars Sylvester Stallone. I mean, dude.
And the biggest mistake he makes is if you ever watch it, he sings the theme song. And I think that just gives people, I can't imagine being a critic then and being like, this guy is even singing. Stallone's a lot of things. He's not a good singer.
Well, his brother is one hell of a guitar player and musician.
Yes.
And as deep as you guys go with this stuff in baseball, like Frank Stallone is deep on old music and like 50s stuff. So anyway.
Yeah, so he doesn't even use Frank as the lead singer. And also, like, you've got Tom Waits involved with your movie,
right,
and you choose and you choose to sing the theme. And Tom Waits actually on that soundtrack has a really good song. I think it's called Meet Me in Paradise Alley, which is a really good song. But Stallone sings the theme, and it just sets the whole thing off poorly, right? Like, even me, I'm like, that's kind of an ego. That's a crazy ego grab. And it's from there that he ended up having to make Rocky 2 just to hold on, because basically people had turned on him already. And and so his whole life story to me is fascinating, because he makes it and then he almost loses it.
Yeah.
And then he basically has to fall back on Rocky, and then he lucked out with First Blood and they gave him Rambo.
Dude,
if you look at his filmography, every time he starts to slip, he just goes back to one of those and just stays relevant.
Well, that's one of his other directing credits is Rambo 4, which is right on this. What brackets Paradise Alley and Rotten Tomatoes is Rambo 4 and Rocky 4, both directed by Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, and I would say Rocky 4, dude. Rocky 4 should be up there. That movie is so fun. That is such a fun, good movie. Rocky 4, I can't find anything. I mean, it's a dumb movie, but it's so good. It's a fun movie. And Rambo 4 gets a bad rap. That's actually a shockingly good movie. I would say that's the best one since First Blood. I'm not a huge Rambo fan either. I don't really. Those are the Rambo 2 and 3 are probably some of the films of his that I've watched the least. Those just not. Those aren't for me. But Rambo, which is technically Rambo 4, is, I think, really good. It's really violent, but in a more realistic way than some of those other ones are.
It's interesting to me what movies that he gets the directing credit, where it's him in the chair, because, he's worked with a lot of directors, dude,
Yeah.
And there isn't this like, Tarantino, Brad Pitt kind of connection. It's like, he's just all over the place. It seems like on the directors. But
yeah, and I think and I can relate to this in a ways. I think he also kind of like we were talking about. He's a real control guy, and I think sometimes he ends up being the director out of like you're not doing it like I want, right? So he kind of takes over. I've heard that about him. He also a lot of times will get writing credits just because he insists on doing his own dialogue and then just insists on getting a writing credit. So he's not always the best look as far as like a dude, especially a guy who came from nothing. He's kind of turned into the cliche of then he ends up being the guy that's like the control guy. But the weirdest credit for me for him is he actually directed Staying Alive, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, and he's not in it. So he straight up directed that movie. And I don't know if you've ever seen Staying Alive, but it is, for my money, the worst thing that Stallone's ever been involved with. I mean,
isn't that when they go to Broadway to be dancers?
Yeah.
I have seen that movie.
Yeah, it is nearly unwatchable. I mean, because talk about something that's like fun for about 10 minutes. And then it's like, okay, like this joke is old. And it's just Travolta dancing in like cat outfits for 90 minutes. It's rough.
Yeah.
And Stallone directed that. Like he was still considered enough of an artist at that point to like just be a sole director. Isn't that weird?
It's crazy because, to watch his career and then to get so huge in the 90s. And I'd like to think he's one of those good guys, like if you actually saw him, he'd be affable and he'd be cool. Like on the flip side of that, have you ever heard the Kevin Smith, Bruce Willis story?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I hate the ones that scream Die Hard the most, like that's what Hollywood does to you. And so when you can have a career that spans that long and not turn into one of those guys, it's, I don't know, saying always better.
I think it's also just kind of that business, I think this is with anything. I think the personality you need, I've seen this with musicians. I mean, most of the most talented musicians that I know don't have the personality to go succeed in that, right? Because you have to have a weird ego to think that you deserve it. And I think sadly, I think those are the guys that end up making it the most, or more the guys that have that ego that think that like, yep, I deserve that.
For sure. And dude, we grew up in that era, the rock star era, where, and this is the same thing where the industry has changed. It's gone on its head, where instead of limousines and airplanes and make way, no autographs, and there's just throngs of people, now they're, it's like meet and greet, that's where they get their money, is doing meet and greets before the show. I mean, the rock star thing has just died. I mean, for the most part, with a couple of exceptions here and there, but you want to make it a music now, you better be out there engaging.
Well, and I think people now can stay on top for a lot longer because of that, right? If you have a good Twitter presence, you never fade, right? You never fade from your audience. So I see that a lot with, my wife and I were talking about this the other day. I'm like, I bet we're the first generation that got to see like our film stars just keep on being film stars. Like, look at Tom Cruise. That guy's still headlining movies. Other than Sean Connery, who was able to pull that off for all those years, I can't think of any other time where you had people that were as famous for as long as they are now. And I think it's just because of that. Like, you can stay relevant and stay on top, where before, if kind of the industry, quote unquote, decided you were done, you were done. You didn't have another voice, right?
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think, those guys that make it, they can stay there for a lot longer just because of that. They stay so engaged. So the downside of today, though, is that it's hard to find those good songs because everybody can release them. And I don't know what's better. It's like, I sometimes for fun just go through Bandcamp. I pick a city or pick a genre and I'll listen to some stuff. And it's amazing how much bad stuff out there is,
Yeah. And the time that you are willing to dedicate to, I'll see what this is like. I'll hear it out. It's just getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
And I remember in one of the bands I was in here in Tucson, I started playing drums in this band called The Monitors that is here. And they had already been a band for a long time before I joined. And I happened to be a fan of theirs. My wife worked with their original drummer who later moved to guitar, so Morgan. And I learned that they were in a band and just downloaded their stuff and was a huge fan.
I am so glad you brought this up because I almost forgot. I wanted to get to the fire department.
Oh, yeah. We'll get there.
The Monitors records, they're really good, really well recorded, and the guitar is really great, but your drums on the Fire Department, they just are really, they stand out.
They have a funny story. So those three guys, Vikas, Tommy, and Morgan, have been friends for a long time. They're like local Tucson guys. Tommy was originally their drummer, and then he has some issues like with his hands. He has like bone issues where basically his doctor was like, you can't play drums anymore. What's funny about them is that so Tommy's a great drummer. Morgan in the Monitors is one of the best drummers I've ever seen. Like, and I've been around a lot of talented musicians, and Morgan's crazy good. So they already had this like great drummer like in waiting. So he was playing guitar. So basically they just switched. And Tommy is another one of those guys I think makes a great like second guitar player. So for a while, they would write songs and record as a 3-piece, and then Morgan would just also play guitar like when they recorded. And so then they got a drummer so Morgan could move back. And so the big pressure for me, dude, when I joined that band is I hadn't played drums in almost a decade. Like I'd packed up my drums. Like when I moved out here, I just kind of stopped doing anything musically for a while. So when I joined that band, I was real rusty. And not only that, but I had to play in front of drummers. I've never had that experience before where 2 of the 3 bandmates were really legit drummers. And I was able to make it, but that was kind of a funny thing with that band is that, the whole time in the back of my head, I was like, I know these guys are better than me, which was a funny feeling.
It seemed like the net effect that had on your playing style on that particular Fire Department record is that you really focused on just solid pocket, in the zone drumming. It wasn't the crazy Eric drums that maybe exist on some other songs. It was Eric. It was professional Eric to me.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you noticed that because that was kind of the whole experience there is that it was, and those guys would tell you the same thing. It was just 2 different schools of thought, right? I came from a much more ramshackle approach. I was always, if you listen to any music that I've recorded as far as like with guitars and drums, I think the last thing on any of our minds would have been like holding the time. It was just about like, let's do it loud, let's do it fast, whatever, sounds good, feels good. Those guys definitely had a much different approach and they were much more technical than me. So like, that was always a big focus was like, not only, keeping everything tight, but also like they would call me out if I was even like if the song went a little bit off beat or like when a little like if the rhythm faded or speeded up at all. And that was a new experience for me. I'd never really had a band care. I certainly had a bands care about like playing the right stuff at the right time, but it was just something I had never really cared about. And so that was a funny experience. And they were just, much more technical as far as they're playing.
It's a palpable difference. It's a tangible difference that that I really noticed. It's like a brick house, powerhouse. You're hitting the drums harder. You're really, like in the other bands, you're living fast. You're taking chances, and it's awesome, and it's working. And on the Fire Department record, not only is your playing like really kicked up a notch, but the quality of that recording in particular. And this is where I want to say his name wrong. Is it?
Vikas
is. Am I to understand that he's the main engineer for all those Monitors records and the Fire Department records?
Yes. So that's the funny thing. All 3 of those guys could record too. And I'll say this for anyone out there that's listening. I am not a technical person at all. I'm actually a big anti-technical. Like I barely even know the name of my own stuff. And that was kind of by design, right? I've never been into that side of it. Like I just want to get a good sound. I was even given this advice to somebody the other day because we were talking about recording and I was like, even on my 8-track, I only ever used maybe 5-10% of its capability. And I think it sounds good. It's that whole thing about making it accessible, right? So like, yes, you can get crazy good at all that stuff. But for me, I was just never interested. But these guys definitely were. And I'm cool with that. Like I thought, like to your point, they get a whole different sound out of it. Those drums sound big because Vikas makes them sound big, like he has that talent. It helps that he's got other drummers in the band, but he's definitely the driving force there. So like when we were in the Monitors, he played bass. He's yet again, another one of those guys I ended up hooking up with. Like he can pick up a guitar or a bass and just do what he wants with it. Like he has no limitation.
He is a fantastic guitar player. Some of those guitar lines, he's just, one amazing guitar player. And, the engineering skills on that, like the kick drum on that Fire Department record is just ear butter. Like from an engineering standpoint, it just is, oh man, that sounds good. And the separation that he got on that record is incredible. And the drums are like the centerpiece of that record, whereas a lot of the Monitor stuff, it was much more centered around guitar. And to me,
my favorite part about those old Monitors records were the drums, because I was like, these guys are crazy. Like, whether it's Tommy, but especially like Morgan, like just doing stuff that I cannot do. And so I always kind of felt bad joining them, because I was like, man, if there's anybody out there that liked them for the reasons I did, like, I'm a different drummer, you know, like the world I grew up in and the musicians that I hung out with, we like, that was not the focus. Like, doing fancy fills and work was not it. It was just playing, like I said, hard, fast, loud, whatever. You know, like what I learned from Onug was like the idea of quiet and loud, but it certainly wasn't like crazy technique and all of that. I've never had drum lessons, you know, I just kind of learned. And so joining them was a big learning curve. And so the Monitors, I joined them for a couple albums, kind of towards the end there. And then Tommy, for reasons I can't remember, he basically couldn't play for a while. And so we weren't going to do the Monitors without him, but we all still kind of wanted to play. And that was where the Fire Department came from. One of their long running kind of gags is they like to mess with like they like to use names from old songs for other records, for like album titles and vice versa. And so we kind of looked back through some old song titles and we were like, well, the Fire Department would be a great band name.
which was a Monitor song,
Which was a Monitor song, right? And that I didn't even play on, I don't think. And so we, for a couple practices, we practiced with Morgan and Vikas on their normal, so like Vikas on bass and Morgan on guitar. I think we even tried to practice with me playing bass or guitar or something. We were just kind of messing around, like, how can we make it different? Because so we didn't want it to sound exactly like the Monitors without Tommy, basically. And so the natural thing seemed to be like, well, you know, Vikas is a good guitar player and Morgan's a good bass player, so let's just switch those and see how that works. And that's kind of how that happened.
That to me is the best part, because like Vikas was sort of like you were in CAC. He's the main driving force, the main composition guy, and you got to be Brad and just chill and play drums. You know, just not that's probably a horrible analogy, but you see where I'm going.
No, I totally agree. And what was funny, the Monitors, you know, being in that band, I thought that too. And then when I was in the practices, it was really Tommy, who I think is a great guitar player. He had a very distinct idea where you'd play something and he would just be like, no or yes, you know, and the other guys would kind of go with that. And if you knew Tommy, he's that guy, right? He's that like, nope. We even have a great song. One of the last songs we recorded with them, it's a funny story I remember, is called We Could. And it's a really catchy song. And I remember Tommy wasn't fully sold on it. So he thought it was like too catchy. So his whole purpose on his second guitar was he just played the like ugliest notes that he could. And we all thought that was really funny. So now every time I hear it, I just hear Tommy just being a jerk. And I think that's hilarious. You know what I mean? He was just like, oh, you think you have a catchy song, Vikas? Well, here we go. And so that was kind of
the bounds of our creative license here and how much we're going to let each other get away with.
Yeah. And I think you need that, right? Like, I think that with any good band, I think you definitely need somebody to be like you're kind of to check each other. Like Matt and I were always really good about that. And same with Brad and I, where I'd be like, that line doesn't work. And he'd tell the same thing to me. Like, it just doesn't work. I think you need that. And those guys were a little older than me. So they came from an even different school. Like he was like an Echo and the Bunnymen guy. You know what I mean? Like just a very different, just a different upbringing. And Vikas had grown up like a metal guy, which definitely comes out in his playing. I remember he once, because I used to just make him play riffs for me just for fun. I love that stuff. Being like, I would be like, just shred. And he could do it on command. Him and Nate are probably the two best people I can see that can just shred on command. Onug. But Vikas said, he's like, when I was growing up, you know, we would just put on Iron Maiden and just play it over and over and just play along to it. So that's how he trained himself, was just playing these like just gnarly guitar parts just repetitively. So he and his friends would do kind of like what Brad and I did with rap, or they would just try to like out solo each other and stuff.
Dude, this is where you and Vikas, to me, are very similar. And like, it's one thing to be an artist and write a song and then go into a studio and have everybody else take care of the recording part. You know, you get so burnt out when you're the guy, you know, doing the majority of the writing. Then you have to record it all. Then you have to sit there and listen to it and mix it and master. I mean, it's so. There's a great Jim Morrison quote where he's like, "Yeah, I can never be a producer or engineer. It's whoever does that has to have an incredible amount of patience. You know, you just have to be there all the time, and there you can't, you know, go away and where everybody else just gets to kind of have fun."
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's the recording part is what I used to love the most, was like recording and then doing all the work after, right? The actual recording process to me was never that fun. Like trying to get people to get their takes and all of that. I mean, that part's okay. I liked the after part of like trying to make it sound good and like messing with the song. He also liked that, but to that point, we were also older and he had like a full-time job. And so it was really a lot more. I felt bad for him in that respect because I knew what kind of time it took. And it was like, not only that, but like when I was doing that, I had nothing. You know what I mean? I didn't have kids or a wife or anything. And he was doing this with like a full time gig. And so, yeah, it definitely, I think, burned him out. The good side of that was that he and I always played very well together. Like as a bass player, I could kind of see where he was going a lot. The unique thing with the Monitors and the fire department is that was the first and only band that I've been in where they truly wrote their songs together, like in practice, which was a new thing for me. I'd always been in bands where somebody brought the song, right, or brought parts of the song, and we would just show up, sit down, and start kind of messing around. And like a lot of times, Morgan would have like a part, or Vikas might have a part, and they would just like craft these songs. To me, those are some of the best songs I've played on. I mean, J Names from Balcony Seats to me is a perfect song. That's one of the greatest songs I've ever played on. And then some of those fire department songs are really good too.
I'm going to play you what I thought was my favorite song of the fire department record.
Ooh.
I mean, dude, that when the two guitars come in, right, like halfway through, it is just like, that is mixing, like really good mixing.
He's really good at that. So funny story with that song is that came out of us messing around. That came out of the one practice where I played bass, and I wrote the first bass line. And I think Morgan added the little second piece to it, the part that kind of goes up and down. So I just played that one loop over and over again. That do 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 do.
That's a great riff. I had no idea you wrote that.
Made it up on the spot.
Dude.
I can't remember how it goes now. It was just one of the, sometimes you just pick the guitar up and you just start messing around and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so we messed around with that for a while, and then we were like, okay, let's try that, but we'll switch back. And then I played drums, then Morgan, added his part to it, and they made up the rest of it. But what was funny, and that's like the only like musical input I had in any of that. So it's funny that you picked that. But what was funny is, this gets back to me being a terrible bandmate with Control, is I remember Morgan trying to kind of like mess around with the line and kind of like play with it. And I was like, no, like it's got to be this. It's got to be the straight up like do 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 like the whole time. And I get like weirdly controlling about that stuff. And I know I do it and I just can't stop. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, nope, it must be this. And for them, that was funny because they were always this like, hey, like, let's try all this stuff. And I was like, that's my bass line and you'll play it this way. But I think Vikas will be happy that song appealed to you, because that song was the one that I remember him always being like, I want more songs like this. Like whenever we would get to practicing, he'd be like, let's try to write another one like that. And you just couldn't. But he really liked those songs that song just kind of flows into parts rather than having there be like hard changes, which is what he was really into.
Oh, and dude, like you could have wrecked that song on the drums in so many ways, and the restraint that you have on that song for like, just in the main riff when you're like just to not do that every time, and then at the very end of the song getting that little upswing, like, it's the one and only time you do it. You could have done that the whole song. You didn't.
Speaking of pro tips, those are lessons hard learned. That's what I learned a lot of that from playing with like Onug, who's Nate, and Fargo, and just that idea. So like Onug's whole big thing was like, there's got to be a quiet and a loud. Dynamics was always the big word for him when I was in a band with him, was dynamics. Like you can't just play loud. It was funny. I was talking with the Widget guys just the other day, and we were talking about, this is a big thing that Pond does and that I've always tried to do, is you play the catchiest part the least, right? So then you never get sick of it. And it always keeps people wanting to come back. I always thought that was a genius thing that some bands do. Like the Minutemen were really good at that. Pond does a thing that we used to call the Pond ending, where they would do, instead of having like a bridge, they would have a brand new part be the last part of a song. So they would do like verse, chorus, and then do like what we would call a Pond ending, where it would be a whole new part and then the song's over. And you're like, wait, I want to hear that part again. You know what I mean?
It's like manufacturing consent in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And that was stuff too that Vikas and Morgan were both really into, and Tommy as well, was just like was trying to get stuff that wasn't so obvious as just verse, chorus, instrumental part, chorus out. You know what I mean? Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. That was a song I definitely think it worked. That song was really fun to play live too. That song really worked when we would play it. But yeah, it was also just watching how they created was very different. But they all knew how each other played. That was a fascinating part for me, is it wasn't weird for them. Just like when I have a funny story about recording the Widgets. When I recorded them in 01, we had to do everything. So if you record on a digital 8 or like on a 4-track, you can't do it live, right? So we'd have to like record the drums separately and then do the bass. So you have to kind of know where you're at. And I learned through that process that the Widgets, for example, they didn't count things off. They just kind of played. So we had like this instrumental part, and I remember being like, okay, well, how many, like, does this go like 16 lines, whatever? And they'd be like, what do you mean? They're like, we just kind of play until like, Doug does this thing, and then we all kind of come back in. I'm like, so they were playing without even counting bars or lines, which was new to me. Because like in practice, we'd always be like, okay, this is going to go for 3 lines, 4 lines. The Widgets were just like playing, which was crazy to me. So yeah, it's interesting to see how different bands work. And it's just, once again, that's what works for them.
That story just reminds me so much of the early days of digital 8s, because you couldn't just record everything live, because you didn't, number one, you didn't have the inputs required, but even if you did, the processing power wasn't great enough to run, 8 tracks at once. So you were inevitably forced into the overdub bin, where, you got to do the drums, then you put everything on top. And when there aren't count-ins, lead-ins, there's no metronome going on, man, it gets tough in a hurry.
Yeah. So we would have to discuss beforehand. And this was I recorded not only my own stuff, but I recorded some stuff for the Widgets. And I also recorded a couple punk records for this guy named Johnny Cat, who was a really cool guy. He was a friend of ours through this guy named Toby that Brad was friends with. And Toby and him were in a band called the Black Rebels. And I recorded their first 45. And then also Johnny then later had a band called the Triggers, who ended up being moderately like popular. And I recorded their first 45 and some stuff that went on some compilations, and then another band of Johnny's called the Pistons. But going through with bands like that were new to this process, it was always kind of interesting because I had to be like, okay, drummer's got to click off because we're going to use that as like the starting point. But then if there was any point in the song where the drums went out, the drummer would have to keep a click because I wasn't using a metronome. I'm too cool for that, right? But also all the people I was recording, like we don't use metronomes, and you can't really hear a metronome when you're drumming, at least with my setup. And so it'd be like, okay, you're going to play the drums with a scratch guitar in your ear, but you're going to have to click to keep the beat so everybody knows when to come back in. So if there's like a break, and that was the biggest challenge, was just getting that initial drum track down. But to your point, I would mic in 4 mics into the 8 track. So I'd have, I always recorded drums. As a drummer, I liked to record drums and angle them like I was sitting at the drum set. So if you listen to drums, I record typically the bass drum straight in the middle, the snare and the hi-hat are more towards the left, and the other side is towards the right. And then I would just have an overhead mic just to capture everything, right? And so you'd have those on 4 tracks, then you can mix those up, but then I'd have to get those onto one of the stereo channels. So once you mix those drums, you can't mix them anymore, right? So once you're done, you're done. Like that's what you have on that one digital channel. Because the digital 8 is really a 4-track with 2 what they call stereo channels.
And at the end of the day, you still have to take it into a studio, whereas a 4-track, you can at least dump it into a tape deck, which you probably have at the house. Yeah, that's the early days of digital 8 recording, man. Pioneer stuff. I mean, putting the word engineer is really in there. I mean,
so right, when we went to go master the CAC album, for example, with Mike Lastra, I had to bring in my digital 8-track and basically punch stuff in and out as it was happening to get it into his system. So any of the drums that like break out or any of the parts where I was punching in and out, I was doing that live in the mastering studio, like in the studio. Like talk about pressure. Like I'm paying by the hour, right? And if I mess up, we got to start all the way over again. I had everything tracked out and written out, but you still just have to punch. And anyone that's used those digital 8s knows that the punch isn't exactly reliable. They would sometimes have a lag, and if it lagged at all, then you'd have to start all the way over. Nightmare, just a nightmare. So I didn't even bring a mixed CD in. I brought in the whole 8-track to master, which was just stupid.
Yeah, the digital 8 punch was notoriously bad. You'd either have to jump it or it would lag, or it was tough.
But then on the other hand, man, if I look at 2000, the fact that we had a digital 8-track, I mean, that was unheard of even in 1997. You know what I mean? Just in 1997, like I knew one guy that had like a 4-track, and that was like a big deal. Like it was just really prohibitive to get yourself onto any sort of recording device. And so for us, the digital 8 was such a gigantic improvement. And it was really cool to us at the time. By the time 2004 rolled around, it was like archaic. It was really weird. It was a really weird, specific time to be messing with recording and all of that, and everything just jumped around so fast. But yeah, dude, recording those bands, man, it would take me an entire weekend to do like 3 songs, because you have to do the drums and then mix the drums while everybody's sitting there in your headphones, mix them onto another track, and then dump all the other tracks, get rid of them to make space, and then do guitar, and then I'd mix those guitars and dump those onto the other stereo channel, and that would give me 4 tracks left for bass and then vocals.
You might as well be recording on a 4-track.
Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the thing. I mean, like when I got the digital 8, and that's why on the early CAC stuff, I panned everything to the left because I didn't understand how the stereo channels worked. It was simple ignorance. I put them over onto those things. I'd mix them, but I didn't know how to stereo pan them. So just learning through experience. But to me, though, that also keeps you honest. A thing that drives me nuts is Bandcamp gives you too much almost. Right. And I can hear that on people's home recordings where it's like, you don't need effects on every single track, on every single thing. I was always kind of happy that we were limited in a way, because it kind of makes you get all the other garbage out.
It's clean. It gets real clean.
Yeah, and that on home recording, I think the more effects you have, at least back then, the more effects, the worse it would sound overall. So I would really hesitate to put like big effects on things, and I was. And if you are going to have an effect, it should be like a big part of that song. It should be like, hey, this is like a special part, not just, hey, what effect can we put on the guitar for this song? Like for me, I'm going to put the same effect on all the guitars unless you're doing something unique, you know. But
on the early digital 8s, that they were really kind of crappy inboard reverbs and stuff like that, whereas now today people are just, they don't know what to do without those effects, especially guitar players. Like to just have clean guitar, like and that's what I think what is the Fire Department record is so good. Those drums are clean, dude. And the guitars they're distorted, but they're clean, and there's really only effects on a couple of solos. But today's bands, so much of it, I mean, the vocals are drenching in harmonizers and melodize and reverb, and I mean, dude, it's like they can't live without those effects,
Well, it's that whole thing of just because you can doesn't mean you always should. You know what I mean? Like, and dude, part of the thing recording back then on the digital 8 is you had to pre-select the effect, right? So if I'm going to put your guitar through like a distortion, let's say, we had to pick it before we recorded it, and we were stuck with it. So
it was printed. Yeah.
Yes. And so a lot of that time was spent trying to get the right sound, where now that I'm getting used to Bandcamp. So like Brad mentioned on his episode with you, I just stopped. I didn't do anything musical for really like a decade, and I just didn't want to get into it again. I was playing on my own and played drums here and there, but like, I just didn't really want to get into computer recording just because I wasn't good at it yet. Oh, I should mention here, one of the other projects I just picked up, I mentioned a long time ago that I recorded half of a new Widgets album back in 2005. We didn't get to finish it for a variety of reasons, and they were all kind of interested in at a place where we can right now. And so telling those guys, I was like, look, you can just record a guitar and send it to me. I can do everything after the fact, right? Because we were trying to work out like, how are we going to do this? And I was like, if you just send me a clean guitar, we can do anything, which is wild. I can't imagine having that freedom back in 2000 when I was like super active, just being able to get the guitar part right and then worry about, oh, should we put a reverb or put an effect or whatever you want to do?
It's like the color wheel in Apple or Photoshop, you can go, red, blue, green, black, or, when you get into the color wheel, it's like, oh, dude, this is too many possibilities for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of the pre-talk that we had, where I was like, look, even though we have all this possibility, like, we're still going to keep it simple because it's going to sound better, Like I was saying earlier, it drives me nuts when I can hear somebody's Bandcamp recording, and I can tell it's just like they put an effect on every single instrument, and like you don't always need that, And believe me, it's tempting. It's fun to play around with those things, and believe me, we played with effects on the digital 8 because it was new at the time. It was just crazy that I could put like distortion on drums. Cancel on Career is simply me just like having fun with this 8-track. It was like one of the first rap songs that we recorded. And I was like, I can distort the drums. Like, let's just do that, And I got better on the next record with like I learned how to record multiple drum tracks on the digital 8 with different effects and then punch them in and out. So if you listen to like 1997, I think there's 3 different drum tracks I have going on with different effects that I would have bounced all onto one drum track at the end.
Yeah, dude. And the crazier thing is, like, I don't know if you have an iPhone, but they have this music memos where it's like AI or whatever, and it knows what key you basically just play a guitar riff, and then you can put an AI drummer and an AI bass player under it, and it's the computer makes choices that are so insane sometimes, especially in terms of those bass lines. Like if you set it to super complex, and you start getting things that you never would have dreamed of doing, or no bass player, but they really work, and it's kind of frightening.
And that's one of those things I can see both sides of it, Like I was always privileged to know incredibly good musicians. So if I needed something, I knew who to go to. But I also can see that like if I'm somebody and I live in a small town, I don't know anybody, what a great gift to have though, right? Like I can have a great bass line on this song and not be punished for the fact that I live in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, the purist in me is like, oh, you should have a real bass player on there. But then I've also been the like lonely kid in an apartment, and what a cool thing that would be, right? To have like a sweet bass line added to your song.
Well, yeah, and this is where the composition factor comes in, because now, it's doing things that you never would have dreamed of, and now you're going to use those things, and it's really become a part of the writing process. And it's not just, oh, I now have the technology to record a guitar part and then record my bass part, and it's literally you can just talk into the thing. It'll figure out the key, the pitch, and it'll put music behind it. It's a brave new world. There's been several times where I've had a little riff or whatever, and I fired it in there, and the AI bass does this crazy thing where I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I'm going to use that, and that's the crazy factor.
Yeah. And, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That was the thrill of like playing with other people, right? Is like, there's certain songs that I would bring into like a Darlings practice, let's say, and Nick would put a guitar part over it that then became the part. So when I listen to those songs, I'm like, how did we ever get to there? It's like you would think that Nick came in with that part, but like, because that's the part that makes the song. So what I originally brought in was boring compared to what he did. And same thing with our friend Joe Talik is a great example of that, dude. You could Joe Talik is a great bass player who can make anybody sound like $1 million. You know what I mean? I could play 3 chords and Joe would make me sound like $1 million. And that is so much fun to have. That's one of my favorite parts about playing music is you get. And I've been, like I said, spoiled with I'm an average musician who rolls with a lot of talented musicians. So I get to have people really like spice up stuff around me, which is really fun. But yeah, I've had that experience a lot where it's like, wow, I could listen to that song and be like, this is the part that started it, which I thought was great. And then now it's like, nope, that wouldn't be a good song without this other part.
Yeah, Talik on those Sticks Downey songs is pretty awesome. The computer now, it's like a bandmate. And the AI, whatever software algorithm, music is just math and harmony and interval for the most part. And the computer, has already run through a million possibilities, but you're collaborating with a piece of software now, where it used to be a band member. So it's to me, it's going to get crazy. And then just like from 2000 to 2010 was like the epic days of the inboard hard digital 8, digital 12, digital 16s with huge hard drives that could fire out a CD, and it was a self-contained unit. It was a studio in a box. That's where music is going now. Collaborating with computers, big time.
Yeah, and that's interesting to me. And like I said, I see the good and the bad, right? I think that's great for some. I also think sometimes that can be a weird, I don't know, that could almost be like you end up with a product that maybe you don't necessarily didn't put the time in for, and maybe that's the old guy in me coming out. Because like I said, I just admitted that like anything that's really good on any of my recordings, somebody else did.
The musicianship of having to play your instrument and in terms of your own personal musical limitations actually being a contributing factor to your compositional structure.
But on that other end, my big thing all throughout, I'm a big believer in accessibility. What drives me more wild than anything else is when people try to make, I'm going to sound really pretentious for a second, okay? So bear with me, is when people try to make art exclusive. That drives me nuts. I'm not a fan of going to like an art exhibit or like a museum just because I know friends that can do the equal without it being a big pretentious affair, right? I don't need wine and cheese to go look at my friend's painting. I don't need it to cost $400. That's just crazy to me. But in music, I see people that try to do that through one way or the other. They try to make I've been lucky that I always had friends that even though they were insanely good musicians, were always very welcoming and very encouraging. A guy like Nate, for example, Nate spent his whole childhood just copying Van Halen and Frank Zappa songs, learning them on guitar. He's an insane guitar player. He easily could have looked at somebody like me, a little 19-year-old punk, and been like, you're not good enough or whatever. And instead, he was always very encouraging and was very welcoming and was willing to teach me stuff. And I was lucky enough to have that. I feel like a lot of people don't have that experience. Even, when I was showing my nephew guitar, he's 9, 10 now, a while ago. And I was like, it's easy, man. Like, here's bar chords. All you really need are bar chords, right? And I wish somebody would have shown me that when I was in high school. Like, I just figured out guitar on my own. But like, people try to make music this very exclusive club of like, you have to be this really technically sound, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I don't think you do, you know? That's why I was a big fan of like the K record stuff, early punk and all that, because it's just like, no, like anybody can do it. I get how people could be against that, but I think it's cool because at least somebody could turn their basic playing into like a cool song, and it might encourage them to get better. If I can turn this crappy 3-chord song and the computer helps me make it sound like a real song, that's only going to encourage me, right? I'm not going to feel bad.
Well, that's the other, like in GarageBand, you can roll the dice, and it's you plug a riff in or whatever, and say you're trying to do drums to it or bass or whatever it is automated on a MIDI map. You just MIDI grid, roll the dice, so you get a different result. I mean, like at some point, the future, you're not even gonna have a creative thought or any kind of passion or drive. You're just gonna hit a button, and it's gonna, like, monkeys in Shakespeare,
Well, look at it this way. I mean, maybe it's an updated version of like, I had an old organ that would kind of do that, right? You could put it on certain settings, and once I started playing, it would just play the bass part along with me. I have a song. One of the Go for Glory songs is that's me playing on an organ, and it just plays the bass part along with me. That's programmed in, and so I think that kind of cheating's maybe always kind of been there. Dude, speaking of, this might be off topic for your show, but there's this great documentary on Netflix called it used to be on Netflix called The Wrecking Crew. Did you happen to watch this?
I've not seen it, but I've heard people talk about it, and it's supposed to be awesome.
You would dig it because basically it's about this band of session musicians that just did all of the backing music in like the late 60s. There's like on anything pop, rock, whatever it was. So rather than them spending time on having the like band that brought in the songs, they were like, no, I know these guys, I can just crank them out. And it was that weird feeling of like, man, all of these songs by all these different bands were really played by the same group of people, which isn't that crazy. So like the Mamas and the Papas was one of the examples they used where they're like, oh yeah, they're not playing on California Dreamin'. That's us.
And nobody knew it back then. Yeah. But I forget, I wish I could remember her name right now, but she played bass on a lot of like Beach Boys songs. And I think she's in that doc.
That lady played bass on everything. And yeah. I'm with you. I was ashamed of myself. I had never heard of any of them until I watched this movie. And I consider myself a pretty deep nerd, but I was stunned. But anyways, that goes back to like, I think music's been cheating all of us all this time, I think.
Like one of my favorite documentaries in that vein is the Stax Record documentary on Netflix. That is a fascinating story of money and music and crime and just, oh man.
It's funny. Brad and I always talk about how we, for a while when they were doing those documentaries just about like one specific album, it would be like how a band recorded whatever. And we were like, man, I could watch any of those, even about albums I don't even know or care about. I could sit down and watch like Steely Dan break down an album for an hour. I just find that stuff so interesting. I'm saying that as not a Steely Dan fan. So,
well, I am, and I've seen those, and those guys were beasts. They brought in session player, like they would have like a lot of those guitar solos. They would just next all day, just until they found the guy that just clicked the best, and that's they would use the best parts. I mean, dude, watching those guys behind the board break down their own songs and doing it on tape. I mean, dude, I could watch that all day for sure.
Yeah. Well, and so let's look at it that way. Maybe this whole idea of I can plug in a guitar and it fills in everything. It brings the studio musician to everybody. Once again, it makes it equal, right? It's equalizing. It's giving the poor guy in the apartment the same advantage as the guy in the LA studio. It's just a different form. So I'm actually, you know what? Through this interview, I think I've made up my mind. I'm pro computer backing. Just for that, it makes it equal.
If you use it to augment an already, original composition, and you've already got all these songs floating in your head, it's great. But when that becomes the main creative force, and like Steely Dan just rolling in 100 guitar players a day until they found the guy that landed the solo, that's a lot like rolling the dice in GarageBand. It just costs a lot more money back then.
Totally.
You want to do any plugs to kind of wrap this up? I mean, obviously slyrecords.com. There's, I guess, the Widgets release that's going to be coming out is going to be dope. The new Walk and Fuss album, The Stallion, definitely check it out. Anything you want to plug as we close it out here?
I think you said it. I think that's the big thing. I think Walk and Fuss, The Stallion is an amazing record. If you haven't heard it, pick it up. It's free. If you want to purchase one, that's great, but it's free there for you. We'll soon be having a old new Widgets EP of different takes of songs that we recorded that I know we all really like. And then We'll also be releasing the Dearling Darlings album, which is Nick and Becky from the Widgets, me, and then Devin Gallagher from Typhoon and the Black Black Black. Little time capsule from 2005. And then somewhere down the road, we will definitely be releasing the Widgets' long-awaited third album, Bring Out the Badger, which is going to be a lost gem from 2005. So stay tuned, and
can't wait for that. I just personally, I had to buy a new Walkin' Fuss t-shirt because I wore the old one out. So I bought a brand new Walkin' Fuss t-shirt. I did the CD combo. Loving it.
And he's so creative with those graphics and how he got that to be the old like SummerSlam logo into his name and all that. It's just wild stuff. He's really talented.
Yeah, definitely. And we will, I'll put links to the majority of the stuff. We covered a lot of ground today, so I'll have to kind of pick and choose which links. Yeah, and as always, the 525 Records podcast brought to you by the Seaside Brewing Company in Seaside, Oregon. Check it out, employee number 99. They have a great menu full of awesome beer. Also, on the 525 Records site, we have the brand new Klaus Fluoride tribute sticker. If you're a Dead Kennedys fan, it's only $1. They're awesome. You can't get them anywhere else. Only on the 525 store. If you're into Klaus Fluoride and you want a vintage Denmark auto touring sticker from the late 70s, the same one made famous on Klaus Fluoride's bass, you can get that at the 525 store. And yeah, 525records.com, 525 Records YouTube channel, slyrecords.com. Eric, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. And anybody that knows me knows that I can talk, man. So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Don't be ashamed. I know why Adam split in two. I know why God don't work 7 days. I know the answer, call her by her first name. I saw the Hindenburg hit the bottom. I know what happens when you mix red and green. Purple is my big specialty, but you are my greatest painted masterpiece. I know that nothing is a big lofty word. I know the fastest way to a Circle K. I know your whereabouts on July 19th. I knew how to find your needle in the hay. La, 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 la. My head is full of color pictures of you, flip-flop, beautiful girl. Although there ain't no negatives, there's at least 20 pictures outside there. That's how I know everything about you. Why, when, and how, who, and why. You stuck like flies to flypaper, and you can never pull back out of mine. La, 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 la. La, la.
Bye.